started. It's 1:07 and I want to be mindful of everyone's time who's here right now.
That's great. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm really excited for today's workshop and want to welcome everybody and thank you for coming on a Saturday morning. This is our first Saturday morning event, so it's a bit of an experiment. And thank Laura and all at Supernatural for organizing it, and Abner for joining us. And then I'll just start with a land acknowledgement, and then I will pass it over to either if Douglas wants to say a few words, or else I'll pass it over directly to Laura, who will introduce Abner. I'm in Sorrento, British Columbia. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm a 5th generation white settler, now living and working as an uninvited guest on the lands of the Secwepemc Nation. Immediately around where I stay include the people of the Splatcheen, Nisconlith, and Squilax bands. Kuksjam, or thank you. The lands within today's political boundaries of British Columbia, Canada, formerly known as the Salish region of Turtle Island, were never negotiated by treaty and remain to this day unceded. A Splatcheen band council member described the Secwepemc Nation lands to me as roughly defined by the Shuswap Lake watershed and occupied since time immemorial by the nation's diverse cultures. There is archaeological evidence of their presence dating back 15,000 years. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the ancestors and people of these bands for their acts and ongoing inclusive activities towards healing and conciliation, and in the defense of the water, land, and creatures of this region. I'd also like to mention that I work in and live in Igoli or Johannesburg, South Africa for 3 to 4 months of the year on the veld that is the traditional lands of the San and Sotho-Twana peoples. Significant gold deposits were discovered in both these locations within 4 years of each other in the mid-1850s, triggering colonial mechanisms of land appropriation, displacement of communities thousands of years old, cultural assimilation, and imperial resource extraction. And so I pass things over to Laura, who's going to introduce our workshop for today.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Supernatural TV workshop. My name is Laura, and I'm one of the organizers behind Supernatural. Supernatural is run by architecture students at Dalhousie University, and we are also a registered nonprofit. We respectfully acknowledge the territory in which Supernatural works as the unceded ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq. We strive for respectful relationships with all the peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation. We honor this beautiful land together. We stand with the water protectors of this land. If you have the means, please support their vital work. We will drop a link in the chat for the Treaty Truck House Legal Fund. I want to begin by expressing so much gratitude to Kristen Kornienko, Douglas McLeod, and the whole global studio community for all that they do. This workshop would not be possible without their vision and their dedication. We are honored to be a part of this amazing project. Over the past few months, Kristen and I have had the opportunity to have a number of inspiring conversations about the rapidly evolving field of architecture. Many of these conversations have centered around the importance of democratizing knowledge, experimenting with modes of communication, and centering voices that are often marginalized. In her own architectural practice and with 1955 films, Kristen has turned to film to share knowledge and engage, and is pushing boundaries within academia by releasing one of the first peer-reviewed documentaries. These conversations with Kristen became the seeds of the Supernatural TV project. As architecture students that have been frustrated with the limits of our curriculum in a time of climate change and social inequity, we have often wondered what conversations were being had beyond the walls of our own studio at Dalhousie. We were curious about what was happening at other architecture schools, what students were doing there to address these same issues, and wondered how we could share ideas quickly and with a much larger community. Thus, the emergence of Supernatural TV. Our vision is to create a platform that everyone can contribute their ideas to through experimental film, DIY documentaries, and even submit their own design projects and processes. Over the next few months, we will be launching this platform and we'll be inviting you all to contribute. It will be an experiment. It might be fun. It might also fundamentally change the way we think about architecture and knowledge sharing. The next few workshops we will be leading will be centered on developing film skills so the whole global studio community can contribute their voices and ideas to the Supernatural TV platform. Without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce our first workshop leader, Abner Collette, from the Atlantic Filmmakers Cooperative. Abner is a trans filmmaker living in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He's a graduate of Vancouver Film School and the writer, director, and producer of several independent fictional and documentary short films. Abner's well-received short film Surfaces can be found in season 6 of Real East Coast on CBC Gem. He's currently working on a short documentary entitled Spectrums, which explores the established scientific link between gender identity and autism spectrum disorder. Abner is the technical and production coordinator for the Atlantic Filmmakers Cooperative, and he looks forward to continuing his creative and professional development. Welcome, Abner. We're so happy to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm so happy to be here with you guys and be able to have the opportunity to teach you about videography. That is the kind of slant that I'm giving it, but it could mean documentary, it could mean experimental film, as Laura mentioned. So without further ado, I'm going to do my screen share thing and we can get started. There we are. All right. I'm gonna back it up. Sorry, it didn't start from the first slide for some reason there. Can you guys all see that? Okay, great.
Yes.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
So yeah, videography is really just capturing anything. It is the root of every kind of filmmaking that you can imagine. It just means shooting something with a camera. Now we have cameras in our phones, so you can use your phone for videography. This is just a short overview of what I'm going to be going over today. Building up your toolkit, so add-ons that you can purchase or acquire somehow through friends or family maybe, to build on your kit or your rig, so you can kind of improve the quality of your productions through your phone. Camera theory for phones. So usually when we talk about camera theory, it would be for full-size cameras, but there is a way kind of to look at it for phones. So we'll go through that together. Some technical considerations that are kind of just regular technical aspects that come up in filmmaking and which do apply to your phones. And as well, we'll have a little area for interviews and self-shooting, self-taping, which is really popular, obviously, on platforms like YouTube and such. It would also be very useful for documentary style productions. Oops, sorry about that, guys. And landscapes in nature. I feel like this is a different kind of section than shooting people, so I made that into a separate little area. And then shooting to edit your film. So I know there's going to be eventually another segment for editing, but shooting or keeping editing in mind when you shoot your footage is kind of paramount, because you have to think about how you're going to put it together and stitch together the pieces of your film ahead of time. You could do it without thinking ahead, but it doesn't end up with such a quality result. And then just a little bit of story, creating a narrative, kind of getting to the root of what keeps people's attention on videos and in film. And so that's kind of what we're going to cover here today. And I would invite you guys to ask questions if you have questions, of course. If we get to like the end of a little segment here and you wanted to ask something, for sure, just chime in. There's no problem with that. So yeah, let's go ahead here. So building up your toolkit, the first thing that you want to look at, I'll mention that most importantly, the phone that you have is the best phone you can use. So whatever you already own, you definitely want to go with that and work with it to begin. But in considering your next phone purchases, you might want to slant it one way or another, depending on what you're looking for, and depending on the issues that have come up when you've been shooting with the phone you already have. So some differences with iPhone and Android that can come into play. iPhone does have really great video quality. It's known for its great video quality. People have shot feature films on iPhones that have gone to theater. And so, yeah, it is a really great video quality. Androids also have great video quality. People do say iPhones have better color quality than Androids, but the video quality is pretty much on par with each other. iPhone has a built-in stabilization algorithm that is really, really advanced. Android isn't quite up to snuff on that yet. So they have stabilization built in on most Androids, but it's not as good as an iPhone. iPhones, as I mentioned, have better color quality generally than Androids. Androids can appear a little bit in contrast to iPhone footage, faded out, a little more pixelated sometimes and grainy. The iPhone does have good autofocus, so does Android. Not really a whole lot of difference in that arena. iPhones are especially good in low light conditions, but Androids are not always. So if you're shooting something dark, you will definitely want to test it first if you're shooting with an Android phone, and just make sure that that's what you want to capture. The most common issue with low light is grain. So you'll see these little fuzzy bits floating on the screen. We want to avoid that if we can. And iPhone, the two biggest differences probably between Androids and iPhones as a whole, iPhones have no expandable memory. So what I mean by that is when you purchase your iPhone, you get 32 gigs or 64 gigs or whatever the internal storage memory is on the phone. But you can't add in like a micro SD card or anything like that. There are some hacks people have come up with to plug in a flash drive into your iPhone, which would require some adapters and stuff like that. But it is just internal memory. So that's a really important aspect. Androids, conversely, have really, most of them have expandable memory. So meaning you can put in a micro SD card and then save your footage onto that card, thus enabling you to shoot a lot at a time because you can take the card out, put a fresh card in, and continue shooting. Whereas if you were shooting on an iPhone, once you run out of space, you've run out of space. Maybe you can delete some things on your phone to give you more space, but it can get a little sticky in that situation. The other major difference or drawback with iPhones is the mic and power situation. So I'm sure you guys are aware that the newer iPhone models don't have an audio jack in them anymore. That's kind of an issue when you're looking at shooting something with your phone, because you're going to have to plug the microphone into the power jack of the phone. That means you can't charge your phone while you're shooting. So that you could run into some issues there with that. Androids do generally have the 3.5 millimeter jack on them, which is where you would plug in your headphones or your microphone. And so that is a little bit of an advantage, but you can kind of weigh these things yourself, and whichever things you think are better for your situations that you're shooting in are going to come into play. So it is kind of an individual decision in the end. Let's see here. So this is a basic phone mount. This section is about building up your toolkit. So we're going to look at a couple products. It's not to say that you guys have to run out and spend, hundreds of dollars on building up a kit, but these are a few things that'll just help you with basic filmmaking. This one is great. It expands to fit different phones. You should check to make sure it fits your phone size specifically. But you'll see that it has a little thing on the bottom here, so you can attach it to a tripod. So this is really handy to use in that aspect. And then we have our tripods. This one on the left here is a tabletop tripod. They can be a little bit shaky because if you bump your table, Can you guys see my camera or not? I'm not sure, actually. Can you still see my face?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Great. Good to know. So if I shake my table, you guys can see that it's shaking the shot of me. That's what's going to happen if you have your phone on the tripod on a table. So you either have to be really careful, or you can use a full-size tripod. These ones on the right here. If you do get a full-size tripod, just be aware that it's something you have to haul around with you. So you might want to get a lighter weight one. But if you get a lighter weight one, wind and other things can kind of bump that as well, and make your shots shaky. A heavier tripod will weigh down your phone and make it kind of a little safer to shoot around wind and stuff like that, or next to, you know, train tracks or a subway station or anything that's going to be a little bit shakier. We have a couple kind of hardware things that we have to address when talking about phones and the accessories that you can buy for them. So on the bottom of that basic mount that we were looking at, there's a 1/4-inch thread. And the 1/4-inch thread is the standard for most phone accessories. You might run into this fatter one on the right-hand side of these two screws, which is a 3/8 inch thread. And if you do run into that, just make sure that whatever kind of rig you're putting together, that it's compatible. It's the right sized screw to go into the right sized hole. This item on the right is a cold shoe. These are items that we use to mount things on your rig. So you can put a light in there, you can put a microphone in there. Most items will have a mount with a hole on the bottom. So you could either screw it in to a thread, or you could use a shoe mount. So those are just two items that you need to kind of know about if you're shopping around for these things. And these are brackets that you could use to potentially hold a microphone on one side and a light on the other, if that was something you're interested in doing. You can also put your phone mount in the middle if it's the right shape. And in that way, you can have, you know, just all of your items set up on the tripod together. And it's a nice little kind of snazzy setup. The item on the right here with the adapter, this one has a shoe mount on the bottom, as you can see. And then on the top, it has the 1/4-inch threading. And this head will articulate any which way. So meaning that if you put up a light on one of these brackets, you could then adjust it to be pointing down or pointing up or pointing left or right, that type of thing. So it's just good to know that these things are out there. And in the resource document I prepared, I've given you guys a couple options to, or a couple leads in the shopping arena to go look around at. These items are very popular, rigs and cages, camera caddies, which is this item on the left. People really, this is kind of the first thing you'll buy. If you're a beginner generally, it looks really cool. It looks like it's going to work really well, but a word of warning, they can be a little less effective than people would like them to be. I find that these ones are just slightly better than doing regular handheld, just holding your camera. It's going to be only maybe 20 or 30% better with one of these items. So certainly go out and buy one if you're interested in them, but typically it's not going to be a crazy improvement on just holding your phone in your hands. So just be aware kind of what you're buying. These caddy ones on the one on the left, these are really good because they kind of hang down. So since it's hanging down, gravity is kind of helping you stabilize the shot. And then it also has these shoes and everything on it for your accessories. So that's super handy. The one on the right is your typical kind of phone cage. It's expandable, so it can fit lots of different types of phones. And of course, again, check that it fits your specific phone. There are a lot of variabilities with things fitting each other in the cell phone camera arena. So always triple check that it's for your phone model. And yeah, so cages can be, and caddies and everything else can be used in conjunction with a tripod. So it's not unlike the brackets that we saw before. you could set it up that way in a stable setting as well, or you could use this for handheld. But once again, it's not a crazy improvement, it's just kind of a basic improvement. Oh, and sorry, the last item there is that some of these cages have lens mounts built into them. So there are entire kind of systems that you can purchase. This one in particular is called a Beast Grip cage, and they have specific lenses that can attach to that mount on this cage. So if that's something you're interested in, going with lenses, that might be a good option for you. These are kind of the beefed up versions that people will make that make it look super appealing to buy this type of item. But once again, just kind of buyer beware that it's not going to be that much of an improvement over handheld. So while they look super, super fancy, they're actually not that stable. And that might be okay, like, you know, if you're chasing after a dirty politician, it's okay that it's shaky footage. If you're running through the forest, it's okay that it's shaky footage. But if you're kind of trying to get a really nice, smooth shot, that's going to be difficult with this type of setup. So we have these type of items, gimbals. That's what these are for, to smooth out your footage. So in contrast with the cages and caddies that we were just looking at, these are motorized items, a little more expensive, obviously, but they will give you a really smooth panning shot or tilting shot. They are controlled with like a little toggle controller, like in video games. So you can control which way it's going. And they have 3-axis stabilization generally. So that means it can go forward, backward. You can kind of shake your hand every which direction with one of those gimbals, and it's still going to remain a steady shot. So this is for kind of more polished work. And the one drawback with these, though, is that you can't really rig it up, as you can see. Whenever you see these gimbals, they look so fantastic, but if you tried to attach your microphone and your light to it, it's going to be too heavy. It won't be able to balance the phone properly with that type of setup. So if you're doing an interview, for instance, this isn't the thing that you want to use. But if you're trying to get that really cool panning shot of a landscape and you want to go all the way across and make it nice and smooth, this is what you're looking for. That's what gimbals kind of do. And it also can be attached to a tripod if you wanted to do that. It's a nice dual purpose because it would save you from having the separate mount. Or if you were out shooting with this, you can just kind of put it on your tripod and go into an interview without kind of re-rigging your setup. But with that, you would have to find a separate way to get your microphone in there. So once again, not the best option for that, for rigging it out. So yeah, these are just kind of little buyer beware tips that I put together. So with phone mounts, definitely make sure once again that it fits your phone. It might just have the measurements available, or it might have the phone models that are that it's been made for, or that it's compatible with listed. Either one of those, just check and make sure. With caddies, cages, don't expect them to be ultra smooth. I've already covered that, but it kind of bears repeating. And gimbals, make sure that the power port and microphone jack aren't blocked. So if you are going to rig it out somehow and have a separate thing going on with your microphone and everything, make sure that whichever way you have the phone on the gimbal, you have the access you need to the ports on your phone, because you wouldn't want your phone to kind of die in the middle of something. And make sure that the accessories you purchase have the compatible threading, as we discussed before. These are lav microphones. So it's probably the first type of microphone I would look at if I was going to do an exclusively kind of interview project with a lot of sit down talking heads. A talking head, by the way, that term means exactly what we're all looking at it on Zoom. This is a talking head. It just means somebody sitting in front of a camera with, you know, either a medium close up or further down on their body, maybe like down to the waist. But it's this shot is called a talking head. So for those types of shots in interview segments, we often use lav microphones because they can be put right onto your lapel. And that's really super handy. It gets really close sound to your subject. So it's a condenser mic typically, which means it's a very sensitive microphone. that means that you're going to get really clear dialogue from that person. With microphones that are further away, that would be kind of rigged right onto your camera setup. You might have some issues with sound if you don't test it first, but with a lav microphone, it's pretty much plug and play. And they do have them for the iPhone power port style as well. So this is an Android iPhone thing that you can do either way. If you're moving around, like if this is a walk and talk type of situation where you have this on somebody's lapel, you can buy kind of wireless ones, but the wireless ones are not the best quality generally. So if you're walking and talking, I wouldn't recommend a lav mic. That's when you would want to go with a more directional microphone, which we'll cover in a sec here. So these are lens hopper microphones. These have the shoe that we were talking about before, this shoe mount on the bottom. And then underneath there, they also have the threading. So it gives you a lot of versatility in how you can mount this onto your rig. These ones are directional. So in essence, whatever you point it at, that's what it's going to capture. It's kind of handy because you know exactly what you're aiming at, so you know what you're capturing. These are probably the most highly recommended type in terms of professionalism, because they are going to be a very pointed, specific sound. It's not just going to capture everything. These have a type of polar pattern, which is an audio pattern, which is very like straightforward. Some other audio patterns go all around, and so it's just not as good for capturing specific things. So these are good. This is probably the best hack I could offer to you guys in terms of making it the most inexpensive rig for videography on your cell phone that you could possibly make, because you don't need any other kind of mounting system or cage or anything in order to plug one of these little microphones into your phone port. So these go directly into your phone, and the phone is the mount in this case. So you could just do handheld footage with one of these in the sound port, and it'll work perfectly. I would just say test it. So do a run through, plug in your headphones, listen back to it, make sure it's good quality sound and that you don't have to move closer or anything. But these are really great for just basically enhancing the professionalism of your video. And it's probably the cheapest way to build a rig for your phone. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this as your first step if you don't have a lot of cash to throw around in terms of making a little rig for yourself. Not great for interviews or self-taping. I did mention this because it's typically true, but it could be good for interviews and self-taping if you're in the right range. So if you're a really far distance from your camera, your phone in this instance, then it might not pick up everything. That's why I'm saying test it before you do it. If you're too far away, then it's not going to pick it up. If you're close enough, then it will pick up the sound. So you could get away with it if you needed to. These are some types of lenses that you can get. So the first one is the cheapest. That's a clip-on lens. I don't really recommend these. I think they're a little too dinky. They kind of tend to move around a lot. So you could end up with some vignetting around the corners of your shot, which is kind of like blocking out the edges. So in other words, you can see the edges of the lens. That happens a lot with these clip-on lenses on the left. So I wouldn't go with those. They're all over the market though. They are very popular. These slip-on lenses are kind of a better step up. They're a little more stable. They'll stay in place better. And they have, you'll see the layers on here if you look closely. So it actually says macro lens, wide angle lens. So these can unscrew and then be a new kind of lens. That is pretty cool and practical, especially if you're walking around and moving. You can kind of switch out your lens really easily. And then here on the right-hand side are these types of systems that I was talking about, which is, a whole case, a whole cage, a whole system in order to just fit the lens onto the phone case. So these are specific to your phone. If you get a new phone in the future, you're probably not going to be able to use the same thing over again. So it's a bigger investment, but it's a higher quality lens typically. And yeah, I'm not sure if I'd recommend these or not, honestly. I'm more of a fan of using the just regular lenses that are included in your phone. And now with our newer iPhones and Androids coming out, they have several cameras on the phone. So yeah, I think that I think we're going to be okay without these lenses, but it is an option if you guys wanted to invest in that type of thing or try it out. There are different types of lenses. So when we talk about lenses in film and with regular cameras that aren't phones, we're talking about it in millimeters. So you guys might run across that. So 25, the lower the millimeter count, the wider the shot. So the higher the millimeter count, the smaller the shot. That would be like the difference between, being super close up on somebody's eye, which would be like maybe 300 millimeters, to showing like the entire person's body from head to toe. That would probably be 25 millimeters, just to give you kind of a rough idea. In cell phone talk, these are communicated in just kind of very broad, vague ranges, and not so much by the millimeter, although as I mentioned, you might run into it. So fisheye lenses, wide lenses, telephoto lenses, and macro lenses are the major kind. And I'll kind of show you guys each one here. So this one is a fisheye lens. I think we're all familiar with this. You see it a lot in skateboarding or sports videos. You can see it a lot in just people who are trying to show off, like cinematography, filmmaking videos, if you watch those. But it's going to bend the image. So when we say fisheye, it's very literal. We mean like the viewpoint of a fish's eye. So yeah, it's going to bend your image. Just be aware of that. And you do have this vignetting around the edge. So there's that kind of black is going to be included in fisheye. It's not because of a clip-on lens in this instance. It's intentional. That's the type of lens it is. Then we have our regular wide lens, which is for wide shots, of course. This would be a pretty typical lens for you to buy for your cell phone. It's probably the most useful of the lenses, aside from a macro lens maybe, which we'll cover in a sec. The reason for that is because it kind of backs up what your camera sees. So if I just have my phone with its regular camera, then it's not gonna start here. The image capture is actually gonna start somewhere in front of my phone. If you get a wide lens, it brings it back toward your phone again so that you can see more of a wider area. So they are probably the most handy if you're gonna get lenses for your phone. This is the best one to get. Telephoto lens is just, you can think of it in terms of it's just closer. It's more like a medium close-up shot, which is what I have as a shot right now, if you're thinking of me in terms of an interview subject or a shot. And these aren't really true telephoto lenses because that's a different thing for cameras, but that's what we call them for phones. And it just means like closer, basically. So then we have macro lens, which is even closer than close. This would be for close-ups of flowers or leaves or any type of little nature thing, or cracks in a wall if you're going with something like that. Just anything that's like hyper close. This would be the second most useful, I would say, lens type that you can buy for your cell phone. Just for the sheer fact of like, it's a really high production value for what you're purchasing. And I guess I should explain what production value is. So when we talk about making movies, we always think about how it's going to look to the audience in terms of professionalism. And the better something looks, the more professionally, obviously, you're going to be considered by your audience. So this is a really easy way of making yourself look more professional. That's just the term we use for that, production value. So you can also buy lights, of course. These are pretty kind of broad and general groups of lights. There are so many different types. but there are ones that can mount right onto your rig. So they're portable, they stay with you. They're going to be pointing at whatever's right in front of your camera. So the usefulness for this is kind of limited. You can think of it in terms of if you were outside at night, maybe this would be a good thing to have. Definitely, it would be a good thing to have. But if you're just kind of going around during the daytime, you don't need this mounting light at all. If you're doing an interview with somebody, I would say you need probably better lights than this, even if it's just lamps around your house. I'm going to show you guys later how to do a lighting setup and how you can approach that. But just shining one light straight at a person's face is probably not going to be something you want to do, or at a subject, an object, a house, whatever you're shooting, unless it's nighttime. So yeah, these are kind of reserved for night. The floor lights are probably the best option that you could buy if you're looking to buy and invest in this. These are what we use for real films. So you're going to get a more professional value out of it, obviously, because it's what we use for real films. These have tons of options. The cheapest and most versatile ones are LED. They can run on batteries, or they can be ones that you plug in to your wall. Often they have both options, of course. And when we look at the lights in the middle, you'll also notice that they have these doors on them that bend. So they'll go inward and outward. This can cut off the light. So if you look at my face right now, when I move my hand in front of the light that's over there, it creates this shadow on my face. That's what those doors do to these lights. So it plays with the angles that the light is allowed to go in. It'll cut off that direction or open up that direction, whatever you decide to do. On the right-hand side here, you see these ring lights. I'm not a huge fan of ring lights, but they're super, super popular, of course. They create a really even lighting. It's very flattering. That's why we see it a lot in beauty videos and stuff like that. If you're going to be sitting down at a desk and just doing a regular kind of YouTube video, I would say that's a decent option. They're also very cheap. They're very inexpensive, so that's a nice benefit. But yeah, these ring lights you can attach to your phone. They'll clip right onto the top of the phone. They can be useful, but they don't create the best lighting in terms of production value, which is what we were talking about before. So it doesn't look as professional. In other words, if you just have all one type of flat lighting as it would if you had modeled lighting, which is when you have a dark area on your face, you have a medium area on your face, and you have a lighter area. So this kind of wraparound lighting is what we're kind of after. The reason being that video by itself doesn't actually give you a whole lot of light, a lot of depth in terms of light. You have to create the depth with lights. So when we're outside, that kind of happens naturally, but when you're indoors and shooting people, it does not happen naturally. You really have to work at it to make it work. So yeah, these are three things that are super important when you're looking for lights. You want lights that you can change the brightness of. So these are dimmable lights. You want lights that can do different color temperatures. Color temperature is something that we're going to cover in a couple of minutes here. And you want lights that are adaptable. So if I was going to purchase a new light, which I often do, I'll always look to make sure that I can mount it on a rig that I'm going to go around with, just in case that's something I want to do. And I'll also make sure that I can put it just like on a stand and put it next to my tripod and have it static and stable. Lights that can do both, you're going to save yourself a lot of grief if you have adaptable lights that are a little more flexible that way. So there are apps that you can buy for your phone. These are camera apps to kind of capture in more detail than your camera app would generally capture. So of course, when you buy your phone, it comes with a camera app. We don't really think about it too much. Generally, you kind of just go with what's on your phone. But these ones will allow you to make more specific choices. So this one, the reason that it's changing and moving is that it's changing aspect ratio. So it's deciding, or this person is deciding what size of screen they want to make their movie. So that's one example of a setting you can do. You can see under that, it also has like your resolution settings. So what kind of quality you're going to film at. This is my favorite app for iPhone and Android. It's called Filmic Pro. And this is the one that people have used to make feature films on their phones. So I would highly recommend it. If you're not into buying this app, I think it's $20 or something, but if you just want to keep things really simple, there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, there are cell phone, just regular camera apps that work perfectly fine. And these ones, they kind of break down for you in broader terms what you can be specific about in the other app. So this is just a regular iPhone app. I think that's like an iPhone 6, so it's been updated, but that's the general look of it. And this is the Samsung app. So these ones, you can see it's really kind of broken down for you. Super slow-mo, like live focus. Like these are kind of their own proprietary versions of the more specific settings that you could get to if you had Filmic Pro. So it'll limit you in what you can accomplish, but they're definitely a beginner's app. So nothing wrong with starting out with that at all. Yeah, and here's some things that you need to consider. So camera tests. Camera testing is super important, and it's something that when you're starting out, and when I was starting out, I really took for granted. So when you buy your equipment, watch all these YouTube videos, take a workshop, as we're doing right now, you'll think and feel like you're really gaining the knowledge, which you are, but doing it in practice is just a different thing. So as I say here, knowing about videography is not the same as practicing videography. You really have to build that muscle memory and get out there and practice. And it's not like, 20 minutes. It's something that you want to make a hobby out of almost until you feel confident about it. Especially if you're going to do handheld stuff, that's something you're going to have to practice over and over again. Practicing and doing camera tests is also how we work out all of the technological gaffes that can happen to you when you're making films this way. And with cell phones, it is a little bit trickier than with cameras that are made specifically just to be a camera. Obviously, a cell phone is a multi kind of item that has so many different functions. And because of that, there are technological things that can go wrong. So identifying what those are and making it so that you don't run into them ahead of time is definitely the thing you want to do. Give yourself a lot of breathing room and just go for it. Go out there and do the action of the thing. Don't just learn about it. You're going to get caught in this kind of thing where you think you know what you're doing, but you don't really know yet because you haven't done it. So that's just a word of advice. Certainly practice your framing, which we're going to cover in a moment, your camera movements, your lighting setups for sure is a good thing to do. Your sound capture, you always want to watch back and listen back to things that you've already made to make sure that the quality you're producing is going to be satisfactory to you. There's nothing worse than working really hard on a project and then only watching all of the footage afterwards and realizing, oh man, I could have improved like 10, 20 things if I had just checked first, So it's really something that I've learned trial by error, but you guys get to know that in advance. So camera theory. So framing is really, 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 really important. And it goes back to art history. Like this is all art. Your filmmaking is art. Videography, even though you're just capturing an event, it's still art. So you really have to think of it in terms of creating, composing a frame in a picture. Even though it's a moving image, we still want to compose the frame and the picture to be the best possible impact. And these are things that over the centuries, they've discovered just draws the human eye. That's where all of these theories are built from. So this one is the rule of thirds. It's basically breaking down, as you can see, this shot into thirds. So this is how we balance our frames in filmmaking. All of these points with the red circles around them, these are the points of focus. So that's where your eye naturally is going to gravitate to. So you can imagine if there was nothing there, our eye isn't going to go to it, right? So if you want at least one of these 4 points, which exist in every image, and you have settings for on your cell phones as well to bring up this grid, so you can literally see the grid on the screen while you're shooting, and that can be helpful. But in this instance, the wolf is what or the dog maybe even, I see he has a chain on him, so he might not be a wild wolf. He's the thing we're focusing on. And you can also kind of make note that we'll discuss this later as well, but there's background, midground, and a foreground here that are also separated by the same thirds. So this bottom third, we have a foreground element that's really close to the camera. And this is also creating depth for your image because you have something that's in front of the bottom of the camera or in front of the side or the top or wherever you want to put it. But you should always have a foreground, a middle ground, and a background in each image. Sometimes just a foreground and a background, but I'll cover that a little more later. This other thing is the golden spiral. It's also, I think, known as the Fibonacci spiral. And you guys are probably familiar with this, I would assume, with architecture, that you come across this. And it's, of course, kind of the same as the rule of thirds. You end up in the same spot, this point at the third mark. So yeah, it's kind of corroborating the other theory, really. But that's always something you want to think about. Here are a couple more examples. So when we're talking about people, you want to put the third on an eye usually, and which eye is really up to you. But the one that's closer to the side of the frame is probably the best one. And it's just because if it was on her other eye here, then she would be too close to the edge of that frame. So you always kind of want to use the outside eye. She's also, her entire body is on this third. If you look at the vertical line, and then horizontally, her eye is on this top third. So there is a lot of composition happening here, even though it looks like it's just a simple shot. If she were standing in the middle of this frame, we wouldn't have the same feeling if we were looking at this image. We would think it's just not as polished or not as interesting. So just something to note there. And then here's one with the landscape. Again, you can see the foreground in the bottom third, the midground in the middle third, and the sky in the top third. So that's our background. This image is interesting to me because we have his knees hitting the bottom third, and then his entire body lands on this left-hand third, but it's his shoulders that are on the top third. If I were to reframe this, I would probably move it up so that his head was on this top left-hand third, where the point of focus should be on his face. Even if it's the back of his head, it should still be where his face is, because that's what humans find the most interesting. So for camera shooting styles, there's a lot of different options. You're going to communicate a lot to your audience through the way that you shoot. So, if it's a calm kind of thing, you definitely don't want erratic camera movements. You don't want bumps or anything like that. But once again, if you're chasing somebody or, I hope for good reasons, not bad ones, or you're running from something or towards something, that's okay. That's acceptable. An audience can look at erratic camera footage that's shaky and bumpy. And if some kind of action is happening that justifies that bump and shake, then it's okay. They'll take that and they won't think twice about it. So that's just something to keep in mind. I have down here concerts, protests, and running, all good examples. Static shots it just means static, staying in the same place. It is still a choice, even though we kind of do it naturally because we're making interview videos and we're making YouTube videos where we stay in the same place. It's still important to know that you're communicating something by choosing to do that. So a static shot can be a lot less exciting, obviously, because you really have to be saying something super interesting to keep people's attention. So you better have some kind of good dialogue to deliver, either in terms of yourself or your interview subject or whoever, whatever is going on, if it's static. If you just kind of stay on that static shot for too long, you might lose your audience. So it is a bit of a risk. And for that reason, we often put moving images over interviews or over YouTube videos where it's just a person sitting statically to make it more interesting. So this could be landscapes, time lapses, interviews, self-taping. Those are all kind of the uses for static shots. Landscapes are probably the one that is most okay for it to just be static. We're kind of used to that. We want to see the whole big broad picture, and that's kind of, you know, something that we won't think twice about. So you could hold on a landscape when you edit your film. You could stay on a landscape for longer than you could stay on a person and still keep people's interest, most likely. Stabilized footage is, of course, what we were talking about with the gimbals and the cages and caddies. And of course, as I mentioned to you, it's not as good as, you know, for gimbals. Gimbals are the best. Cages and caddies are next down, and then under that is handheld. So there are different variations. You'll see online, if you look for stabilizing products, that almost everything is called a stabilizer. It could just be a handle that you're holding like this, and they'll call it a stabilizer. So you just have to be careful of what you're buying. But it should be a stabilized shot should be a softer, smoother shot. So that's what you're aiming for, to have that smoothness. There's not a lot of bumping or glitching or anything. This is a calm, nice, smooth shot that moves really nicely. Motorized versions are always better than the handheld ones, as I mentioned. And yes, so here are the types of shots. These go, I'm using mostly people for this, but I just want to point out that it also does apply to landscapes. So if this was a landscape that purely and there was no person there, you might imagine a wide shot of a tree, and then we get closer and closer and we end on the leaf. So it's just important to note that it's not just for people. These shots are for everything that you cover. So an extreme wide shot, we can barely even make out this person, but we can see there's a person there. A wide shot would mean the entire body or the entire tree or whatever you're capturing. It's very wide. And a medium shot is typically from the waistline until the top of the head. Medium close-up is from the chest till the top of the head. And a close-up is going to be like probably just your chin. Sometimes the shoulders sneak in there a little, as you can see on this shot of this guy. But typically it would be from your chin to the top of your head. Extreme close-up is, of course, super close on any kind of item. I find this a really funny extreme close-up, since we can see kind of just all of his features squished into the frame like that. It would probably have been a better choice to select an eye, or, you know, close up on his hands or something like that, because this isn't a very attractive shot, just noting that. There's also lots of different types of kind of specialty shots. So the ones we just covered are the basic shots that you should always be thinking about when you're shooting. Every situation you go into, you want to capture at least a wide shot, a medium shot, and a close-up. That's just so that you have something to cut to in editing. If you don't do that, you'll find that you haven't gotten the full picture, and you're not going to be telling a story in the same way as you'd be telling a story if you got those basic shots. But I'll talk a bit more about that later. These are some specialty shots that you can do. Bird's eye view and worm's eye view. It's exactly what it sounds like. There's nothing mysterious there, but it is interesting to think about. These also have implied power dynamics. So a worm's eye view, although it kind of seems like look at this flower. The flower is very powerful here, right? The flower is looking really majestic, really big, and that's because we're below it. So when you're shooting, it's good to keep in mind that angles that go upward towards somebody, like this flower, it's going to make them look powerful. It's going to make them look like, you know, a leader, or, you know, somebody who has a lot of authority. So just keep that in mind and do it very intentionally. And of course, conversely, if you have a bird's eye view, it makes things look kind of powerless, like they're on the other side of things, they're a little more helpless. This picture of a boat doesn't really do a whole lot of justice for the power dynamic aspect, but you can see how it could mean that, they're in trouble. If we were watching a fictional film, this could mean like, oh, something bad might happen in a minute or two, right? So yeah, that's something to keep in mind, definitely, that these shots exist, but they also have implied emotional uses that you wouldn't want to stumble onto accidentally. A two shot is just simply what it means is what it's called. It's two people standing next to each other. These are really common shots, though. We often see, especially in documentaries, people sitting next to each other on a couch, like, spouses or a parent and their kid or whatever. Those are two shots. And the important thing to think about with two shots is, once again, that framing. So this two shot particularly is not great. And I chose it for that reason, so that you don't make the same mistake. So the edge of the frame should be closer in toward these people. Right now, where the thirds would land on them, the vertical third lines, it would be like on the edge of their shoulders. So they're kind of too close together to be a well-composed shot. If this was a smaller frame, then you could see that, their faces and the outside eyes would be on the third lines. So that's something to keep in mind, that this is probably not the best composure of a shot, but they've obviously gotten away with it. When you glance at this shot, it looks, okay, but it could be improved. And then I have on the right-hand side here kind of an improvised two shot. This is just to show that kind of anything can be a two shot. Like if you're showing a dog next to a fire hydrant, it can still be a two shot. You should still frame it with that in mind, and with both of the people on the thirds. So if I had two people sitting here on my screen, these are the third lines that they should fall on. Not too far out, but right here. So that should be relatively where their faces are, or, a dog's face, or, a tree or a squirrel, whatever you're shooting. These are point of view shots. They're very popular in kids entertainment. They're popular in kind of more erratic horror, sci-fi movies, that type of thing. A POV's point of view, POV, is not the best shot to do. It's kind of overdone and a little trite now to shoot a point of view shot. So you should have a really good reason to do it if you're going to do it. But with sports and stuff like that, totally great. It works really well with sports because, of course, you're right behind the handlebars. You're there with the person, and you can see from their point of view. So in this way, it can be really well done. This person eating their noodles in front of a waterfall, not so much, right? Like we look at that and it's kind of like, why are they doing this? They could just show us the waterfall. Maybe they should be standing in front of it or something like that. Seems like there's better options to do with that, with the one on the right here. So yeah, just make sure you have a purpose with it as well. This part is about camera movements. I guess before we move on, does anybody have any questions? I'll take that as a no. Feel free to chime in once again if you have any questions. So camera movements are super important. They also communicate to the audience what you're trying to convey. So it's important to think about what you want to say and how the shot that you've chosen will communicate that with the audience. This shot is a panning shot. It literally just means moving from side to side. So if you're going one way or the other, that's panning. People often will confuse tilting with panning. They'll say pan up, pan down. If you're panning, quote unquote, up or down, you're not panning, you're tilting. So that's really important to note. And tilting and panning are just two of the most basic camera movements you can do. You can do these on a tripod. with the control arm that comes on the tripod and move it along as smooth as you can. You can definitely do these on a gimbal. They would be very, very smooth on a gimbal, or you can do them handheld. But that'll take a lot of practice to make it look smooth. It depends on the person as well. I've come across people who are just really talented at handheld stuff with their phones or with cameras just instantly. Like they're just a steady, stable person. I'm a little more shaky, so it took me a lot of practice to get there. I think most people are a little more shaky. So this is a tracking shot. So you can tell here that we're following along with this guy. That's what makes it a tracking shot. It's basically just staying in parallel to something. A popular way to use this would be shooting out of your side, the side of a car, like the passenger side window, for instance. And you're shooting all the buildings going by. That's a great use of a tracking shot. It just means staying with the subject and running parallel to something, basically. But yeah, these can be useful. I find the most useful thing for this documentary-wise would be if you're walking next to an interview subject and you have the camera pointed at them. So this is your camera, my two fingers like this. So you have the camera pointed at them and you're following along with them. So it's almost as if the audience is talking to them as well, like we're engaged and in conversation with this person who we're following along next to, just like you'd walk down the street with a friend. And this one is pushing in. So pushing in can be accomplished, as you see in this video. This fellow's using a dolly on a dolly track. Dolly, D-O-L-L-Y, like a dolly, like a kid's dolly, but it's a different kind, obviously. And this is a great use of emotional shooting, where this means something. Like we're going in toward this person, we're becoming more intimate with them. We're going to go take a closer look at what they're doing. So this shot can be used when you're trying to build tension, when you're kind of going toward a more emotional point in your story. There's also a way to do this in post-production when you're editing, which commonly is called a Ken Burns effect. I don't know if you guys know the documentary filmmaker Ken Burns, but he does this a lot. He just takes like a photograph and he'll slowly push in on the photograph. And he accomplishes that with post-production in editing. But this is done in real life. And so it just has a different feeling to it because you can see the background moving. We can see kind of the orientation of things. So it's always better to do it in camera if you can. Oh, and as I said there, it's a lot like zooming in, like if you were just pinching your screen and zooming into something, but it's like doing it actually, not just digitally. And this is pulling. So pulling is moving away from anything. Pulling away or pulling can be kind of used for like, you've just made a point and now we're going to sit with that point that you gave us about something. Say it's an environmental issue about, a cluster of trees. Maybe we would see those cluster of trees and move away from them. So it gives us a little moment to think, and it kind of engages the audience in like this feeling of like, ooh, like I'm so small and the world is so big, it kind of puts us in place in the universe for a lot of shots and documentary and filmmaking. But this use is kind of more kitschy, the one that I've chosen. It's used in a small way, just to be like, this is a pull shot. You could do this this way. I think this would have been more interesting if they had been really close into the table, like if they started with an extreme close-up of the table and then draw all the way out. That way you could use this as a transition in between your shots. But anyway, just something to think about. The foreground elements in your composition are probably one of the most important things that you could do in terms of professionalism and in terms of making things look like they have depth. So when something's up close to you and is close to the camera, That's what we call a foreground element. Anything that's close to the camera is a foreground element. I think I saw somebody raise their hand.
Hi, Abner, it's Kristen. Yes.
Hey.
I wanted to ask you, in the pushing and pulling and adjusting and so on, is it better to actually move the camera or use like the pinching and pulling with your fingers to actually physically move? And again, also then in post-production, also, if you could talk a little bit about that'd be great. Thank you. And this is just amazing that your discussion is amazing. Thank you.
Oh, okay, great. Good to hear that. That's a great question. And I wish I would have actually thought of that to put it in. So fantastic question, first of all. So the difference between those is going to have a lot of different factors. When you're doing it in real life, that's always going to be the best way to accomplish it. The reason for that is if you do it on your screen by pinching, that's just zooming in. Zooming in is going to create some pixelation probably. So you're going to get like some grainy, fuzzy bits floating around. If you go super close in, you can experiment with your camera just in your house and observe how much clearer it is when you're all the way out and you're not zoomed in compared to when you are zoomed in. The quality of the image is going to be reduced because it's a digital zoom. Digital zooming is just an algorithm inside your camera. In this case, inside your phone. So yeah, it's not going to be as high quality. Definitely better to actually move in and actually move out in real life. And the best item that I've listed here to accomplish that would be the gimbals, because they keep everything really smooth. So even though you're doing it handheld, that would probably be the best way that you can do it simply without purchasing a dolly, which is kind of a more professional item to purchase. Doing it in post-production is really, really handy if it's a still image. So for instance, I'm making a documentary right now where I have pictures of myself as a child. So when I go into my editing program, I do want to put some movement on those still images. If you don't put movement on them, they're just going to sit there. And audiences don't really like that. It's just not as interesting. It doesn't get the cogs in our brains turning in quite the right way when we just see a still image. So I would say to reserve the editing version, that Ken Burns effect that we mentioned, for just kind of still images that you don't have any control over because you didn't capture them, or maybe you did capture them and you didn't get to take a video. But either way, that would be kind of a last resort item, I would say. And yeah, always better to do it in real life and move in real life. Yes, with these foreground images. So you can use these for transitions, which I'll discuss in a second, but they most of all create depth in your image. So imagine if this pier wasn't here, if the dock that we're looking at, if that wasn't in this photo, I would just be looking at the photo and say, oh, that's a nice photo. You know, but when you put the pier in, it gives you some kind of dynamic kind of view of things, and it just changes the way we see the image. So when you're talking about composition, I actually would have put this over on one of the thirds. This is very like kind of centered, this dock. Which is fine. It gives a certain sense of things. Maybe if they had the camera a bit lower, it would be more impactful that it's in the center, because you'd see those sidelines kind of at sharper angles, right? I don't know how to do my angles right here on the Zoom, but yeah, so like if you had it like lower down, you would see the angles more staunchly. Right now, they're kind of more in like this because they just have it up like probably on this view, just standing up normally. And yeah, so that'll change the lines of this dock. That might have been more interesting, but the best case scenario is to put them on the thirds so that it just looks good and you don't have to fuss around too much with it. And then similarly, we see this flower here on the right-hand side. This is a great example of dividing or separating your background from your foreground with focus. So this is actually what camera phones are really, really good at. You know, when you tap on your screen and you get that focal point, that kind of focal point will often put everything else out of focus, and that separates your foreground from your background. So you could, in essence, say that this one on the right-hand side doesn't even have a midground like we talked about before. Usually it's foreground, midground, background. But in this case, it's just basically foreground and background, and that's it. But it still looks beautiful. We still like the image. It still looks really nice. And as you can see here, very satisfying because it's on the third. It's on this right-hand third. So yeah, foreground elements are something you definitely want to think about, and they become even more useful, which I'll cover in a second here for transitions. Here's just another couple examples. I just wanted to reiterate with these that putting your bottom third, putting the foreground element in the bottom third for landscapes is super useful. This is what makes the image dynamic to us. So I just want to show a couple more examples of that to solidify the idea there in your minds that, you know, if you're about to shoot something and you're like, oh, wow, this is so beautiful, maybe lower your camera down so that something is on the bottom. Because with landscapes, you can often kind of work in some grass or some flowers or, you know, some kind of rock, as we see here, that just makes the image so much more beautiful. And this is a video. Hopefully the sound's not going to be too loud here. So I've chosen this video because it was one of the first ones that I found that had all of the basic transitions that you would want to create in camera in the same video. So it's really well-made little video. A transition is basically how you're going to end and begin your shots. It's very tricky because you have to plan them. So transitions aren't natural. If I went out and shot a bunch of stuff, like there's a park down the street from me, and I could get some nice trees and nature and all kinds of things, people walking their dogs and everything else. That's all great. If I go home and I put that in my editing program, I'm going to quickly see that I didn't think about transitions. Because when you put all these clips together, you know, how do you get from an image of an old lady walking her dog to a squirrel eating nuts under a park bench? It seems like they would just be seamless, but they're not. They don't have anything in common, and because of that, the image change can be jarring. Maybe that's what you want to go for. That could be something that you might do intentionally to make it jarring. If it's, say, an experimental film and you want that to be like, oh, something's wrong, because that's how it'll feel to the audience if you just cut from things randomly. So transitions, for that reason, are something that you want to plan. But the good news is that you don't have to plan too thoroughly. So if I just take my phone here, I'll just show you, like I could come out from behind my phone and that could be the transition. That could be the entire thing. So it's really easy in life when you're out shooting to just find things to go behind and come out from. And the way that those are going to work out is when you start a shot by coming out from behind something, and then you've ended another shot by going behind something at the end, then you can take the end of the one shot and the beginning of the other shot and stitch them together in post. And that's going to create this seamless transition. So without further ado, I'm just going to show this video here. I hope the sound isn't too loud. Maybe you might want to turn down your volumes for a sec here.
Abner,
You're muted, Abner.
Muted. Sorry, guys. I coughed before, and I thought that would be distracting. So yeah, as you can see here, these are really great ways to improve your production value with literally no money. So you're just literally going, from behind things, up from things, down into things. These are super simple kind of ways to make your videos seamlessly better. Oops. To move on from it. There we go. So I would highly recommend that you think about your transitions really hard if you're going to do a very intentional, specific type of documentary. But if you're just out shooting, just try to incorporate them as many times as you can, and maybe try to think to yourself and kind of edit in your head which ones are going to go with which ones, if that makes sense. So this is general, just capturing B-roll. B-roll is a term that we use in film to indicate that it's extra footage. The kind of trick about B-roll is that it's not really extra. We depend on it to make our movies. So these are really simple, easy kind of examples of B-roll. These are things that you can capture by just putting your camera on the tripod and leaving it. They're things that are kind of accessible as well. And we want enough of this type of B-roll because when we watch somebody's interview, for instance, or if we're talking on YouTube, it's like a self-taping kind of situation, you need all this extra footage to be able to stitch together. So you can imagine that there are parts of the interview I want to use, and there are parts of the interview I don't want to use. Well, what's going to happen when I cut out the parts I don't want to use and then stitch the pieces I do want to use back together? It's going to be a very jarring switch. People get away with that a lot more with like YouTube style, just like self-taping, talking to the camera, where it's a jump cut. You'll see like their face is just suddenly like in a different place and they're saying something else. We get away with that a lot in social media and like online platforms and stuff. But if you're taking it a little more to the next level and want more documentary style, you can't really get away with that. So the good parts that had the bad part cut out in the middle, we need a Band-Aid to put those together. We need something to put over it so that we can link the one clip to the other clip and make it seem like that person was just talking that way the entire time, that it's one sentence to the next and there was nothing in between. And to do that, we need this B-roll footage. So you really can't get enough of it. An amateur or a beginner kind of mistake is not getting enough B-roll and then having to go out and capture things. If that happens to you, it's fine. Just go reshoot it or shoot some extra stuff. B-rolls in terms of documentaries could be artifacts around a person's house, things that are personal to them, things within the setting that just makes sense to capture. And I'll cover that a little bit more here. Just some technical aspects that are going to come up if you're shooting with your cell phone. So frame rate is one that people generally ask about. Which frame rate should I shoot at? Should I just go with whatever's on the camera as a default? The answer is kind of yes, you should go with the default. The default is 23.98 frames per second. The shorthand of that is 24 frames per second. You could use 29.97, 30 frames a second, lots of different options here, but they're not really going to come out looking that different. 30 frames per second is used in television for reality TV. That's why it looks so clean and like clear and that type of thing. It's because it's 30 frames a second, not 24. The 23.98 is going to look cinematic. That's what it's built to look like. So I would definitely stick with 23.98 unless you're doing a slow motion capture or a time lapse. Those obviously are going to be outside the standard frame rates. It's super important to keep your project at the same frame rate. So if I went out and recorded one interview with somebody at 23.98 frames a second, and then I forgot to put that setting or I changed the setting accidentally for something else, and I did another interview at 30 frames per second, They are going to look different in your project, and you will run into troubles when you're editing your project. So you want to keep the frame rate consistent, except for with slow motion and time-lapse captures. Then you can change it. Most of the time with our phones, it's going to say slow motion capture or ultra slow motion capture, but sometimes it'll actually say the frame rate. So if you're selecting it for slow motion, you want to go around 60 frames per second. That's just kind of the general slow motion capture frame rate that we have in the industry. This is a consideration for sure. So color temperature, as I mentioned before, is the actual spectrum of light that we're gonna both see and create. So if you're outside on a sunny day, the sun is kind of yellowy orange. So we tend to think about it as on the oranger side of the spectrum, but unless it's sunrise or sunset, if it's just plain daylight, it's actually blue light. It's not orange light. So believe it or not, daylight is blue. And that's really important because if you're shooting and you're using one of these better apps that we have, camera apps on your phone, and your color temperature is in the wrong color space, your image isn't going to look quite right. You'll probably even say to yourself, this image doesn't look quite right because they look so different from one another when it's the wrong filter on the wrong clip. So in standard terms, orange light is indoor light. Now we have LED lights that are for indoors that are white light or blue light. You'll see the white is right in the middle, it's neutral. But yeah, most of indoor traditional, like incandescent light bulbs are gonna be orange. And so that's the color temperature that we wanna set our lighting to if we're doing indoor lighting. If we're outside and it's nighttime, for instance, you still want to use your blue lighting or white lighting. You don't want to do orange outside. So that's the general kind of gist of it. And the scale that we're looking at, 2000K, 3200K, this is called the Kelvin scale, Kelvin. And this is how we just kind of express what these different colors are in the range of color temperatures. So yeah, it's definitely a handy thing to know, and you might run into it. Your stuff might not look right, so you'll have to figure out why. So you can change the settings on your camera. So this is daylight, and as you can see, when we look at it in contrast to an indoor shot, it does look blue, which is really funny because before I learned about this, I was always like, what are you talking about? Like the sun is orange, outdoor light is orange, but it's not, it's blue. So yeah, it's really easy to see the contrast there between the two images. And this is what it'll look like if you're selecting your color temperature on your camera. So as you can see, it's kind of in the blue space and we have the sunset going on. That's all correct. That can be that way since you're outside. If you wanted the sunset to look even more red and glowing, you could go over to this orange side, and that's how it would make it look. I wouldn't go over to the orange side in regular daylight though, once again, only for like sunrises and sunsets. Exposure. So there are two ways that you can create exposure for your images. Exposure is three different parts that go together. So actually I'll go down to my next slide here. So it's like a three-sided triangle. We have aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. ISO is just a term that's used to describe the sensitivity of your camera sensor. So aperture is how much light you're letting into the camera. Shutter speed is how fast the shutter is opening and closing. And the ISO is how sensitive you want your sensor to be. So if it's a low light situation, you want it to be more sensitive. If it's a really bright situation, you want it to be less sensitive because you have less to compensate for. So there are two ways you can do exposure with your cell phone. The first one is automatic, which is great in 99% of situations. I would say just go with automatic because learning how to do manual exposure is really challenging actually. But there are certain situations when doing manual exposure would be a benefit. Like if you were in an interview situation where you're using daylight coming through a window, if the daylight is going to change throughout the interview, your camera is going to react to that in real time as it's recording. So it's not going to look good. It's going to be really like, you can see the brightness and dimness changing in live action in your recording, and that's not the ideal. So I would definitely recommend it for anything that's sitting still where you know the lighting is going to change. That's when you want to learn how to do manual exposure. There is kind of a shorthand to it. You know, there are typical rules and guidelines you can follow, like daylight. If you're outside, probably you want a lower ISO. You want it to be less sensitive, of course. You want a regular shutter speed. Shutter speed is always the same. It should just be double the frame rate. So you just multiply the frame rate by 2, and that's supposed to be your shutter speed. And then your aperture, because it's controlling how much light you're letting in, that's a super important one. If you were going to do manual exposure, I would say that's the most important thing to know, is just that if you raise the aperture, you're actually widening the hole. So you're letting in more light. It could mean that you have kind of too bright images. We call it blown out. So that means that the highlights or the bright spots in your frame don't look good. And it's kind of funny to put it that way, because you really can tell, even if you're not a film person or a camera person, like, oh, this doesn't look right, you know? We don't really have to deal with that though, because it's mostly automatic. But if you do ever go to manual exposure, at least figure out the aperture part, because that's going to be have the most impact on your image. And here we have resolutions. So we hear a lot about 4K. 1080p is another term you might have heard. These things are literally talking about the pixel count in the image. So here you can see that I noted that real 4K is 4096 horizontal pixels. This is 4K supposedly, but it's actually UHD. So UHD is ultra high definition. And you'll often see that term on your camera when you choose 4K. It might actually be called UHD. And I think that's more common on Androids for it to actually be called UHD. But this is the highest quality that you can capture on a cell phone as it stands today. And it's a great quality, but it's a really large file size. So 1080p, this other one down here, that's the standard. That's actually just called full HD, full high definition in the film industry, and this is enough. So this is very close to the amount of pixels they would project in a movie theater, for instance. So it's enough. But if you were going to do some fancy stuff in editing with your footage, like using, in theory, you could use a shot of a medium shot. And if you've shot it in 4K, then in post-production and editing, you can go in and get a close-up shot out of that. And usually if we stretch out the frame that way in editing, it's going to look really pixelated. It's not going to look good. But if it's 4K, you have enough pixels to be able to stretch out that image. So there are definitely purposes to 4K, but if you're going to shoot a whole project in 4K, you want to make sure that you have enough storage, because the file sizes are really gigantic compared to 1080p. 1080p might just say standard HD, it might say full HD, or just 1080p, 1920 by 1080, that type of thing. But yeah, just important to kind of note that. And as I said, when we talk about resolutions, we're talking about pixels. You are choosing a resolution to correlate with how much detail you want in your image. More pixels equals more detail, obviously, and how much flexibility you have in post. But of course, it does affect your file size, as I mentioned. 1080p is fantastic for online platforms. If your film or your documentary or video is going to go online, don't even worry about 4K. I really wouldn't. 1080p is fantastic quality. These screens are so small that the pixels won't get stretched. So just shoot in kind of the standard fare, I would say. If it's for a professional purpose, you might want to go in 4K, but then you would have hopefully some money behind it. An aspect ratio is related to resolution, but it's not the same thing as resolution. So here we can see that 16:9 is one of these resolutions that, or one of the aspect ratios that's listed. 16:9 is the aspect ratio of 1080p, for instance. That's just what the size ends up being, correlates with this aspect ratio of 16:9. And the aspect ratio is just the width versus the height. So 16 versus 9. So it is 16 units wide and 9 units high in relation to itself. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about aspect ratios. I would just keep it at 16:9. The 4:3 aspect ratio that you see there is the old one from the 90s, if you were around then, where we saw that on our televisions, that square kind of looking image. That's the 4:3 one. But there's not a whole lot of reason to go outside of 16:9. And then just one other thing to note is that the smartphone sizes, if you're shooting vertically with your phone held up like this, it's always going to be a different aspect ratio for every different phone. But if you're shooting horizontally, then it'll be one of the standard ones. So just note that vertical videos are kind of tricky, and they can be tricky in post. So you'll want to test out your workflow with that before you go ahead and shoot it. Just a quick word on codecs. I'm not going to get too into the muck with this, but codecs are something you're going to have to deal with if you're recording video. If you get one of those camera apps, they'll often ask you, what do you want us to shoot this in? What codecs? And most people are like, what? I don't know. You decide what's best, please, because this is kind of a mucky situation. There's a lot of history in it. So there have been a lot of codecs that have been transformed to kind of like proper modern day standards. And so these have been around a long time with a long winding road history. So it's not a straightforward kind of subject matter. Codec just means compression, decompression. So when you record your video, it compresses the video. And then when you play your video back after you've recorded it, it decompresses the video to be able to play it. And that's kind of the basic purpose of a codec. It's really what enables us to make any digital filmmaking stuff at all. That's what codecs are. They were part of the technology that made that possible in the first place. But we have our codec, and then we have a container that goes around the codec. So a lot of times people will think of an MP4, for instance, which is a very common container, as the codec itself, but it's not the codec. It's just a wrapper, just like with a burrito. Imagine a burrito. The video codec and audio codecs are what goes inside the burrito, and the container is what wraps up the burrito. It's the tortilla, right? So it's just kind of something to note there. There are really no bad codecs now in terms of what you can select on your cell phone, because they've kind of weeded it out so that you only have the good ones available. They're not going to, give you an option that's like, this is a really poor quality option. Do you want this? They're all kind of top of the line options nowadays, so you don't really have to worry. But here's a little bit of info. So the H.264s, those are great for YouTube. You'll also want to export your videos into H.264s on the editing side. That's kind of the YouTube standard export that we would make. ProRes, it's Apple's version of it. It's now cross-platform. But yeah, ProRes is just another codec. We have this one, DNX HD. This was kind of the PC codec. Now it's cross-platform as well. And then we have our wrappers. The most common was MP4. The reason for that is it can have audio and video in the same container, and some other video codec or some other video wrappers can't do that. So MP4 has become the most common one. It's also referred to as MPEG-4. They're the same thing. They're just, once again, it's an artifact of the history of codecs that we've been dealing with them for so long. Another one such codec is an MOV that can also hold audio and video. I'm not even going to cover audio because it's usually MP3 or AAC, and those are both great. There's no real discernible difference between the two of them. AVC HD is just a different one that is for HD recording specifically. You'll find that a lot on kind of camcorders and that type of thing, like, you know, your regular family camcorder. And then an AVI is just a Microsoft proprietary wrapper. But yeah, having said that, just remember H.264 and MP4, MPEG-4. Those are the main ones you're going to want to look for. So yeah, interview approaches. So there are two approaches. You can either study everything, know everything about the subject matter. At that point, you probably are going to know what the answers are to the questions you're asking. That's okay if you're that type of person who wants to do it that way. That's fine. There's also the easier, faster, and less structured way of just kind of discovery. So in this way, you would ask the authority on the matter, what is this? What is that? And then kind of discover your questions along the way. So the information they're giving you is going to lead to other questions. And both ways actually have their merits. A lot of times you don't have the time to study and research a subject matter because something is happening, in the world that has to do with that topic. And the discovery method is a great shortcut, but ideally we would want to study and research and prepare, of course. So pre-interviewing is a method that you would use to kind of get the most out of the interview. Often by having these conversations in advance, you can discover new facets about a topic or subject matter or about the person themselves that you had no idea were there before. So only in conversing in advance are you going to discover those. A lot of them will get kind of washed over if you just go straight to the interview. So for that reason, pre-interviews are super important. With emotional matters, if it's, say, somebody's, I don't know, their water quality is poor. There's a lot of people with like flames coming out of their taps. I don't know if you guys have seen that online, but if there's too much sulfur or some kind of water problem, and it's a really emotional kind of issue for them, you'll want to reserve that emotional stuff mostly for the camera, because if they get it all out in the pre-interview, it's going to be less impactful to the audience. This kind of might feel like you're playing with people's emotions, but it's really just so that you can communicate your message better. So it's for a good reason. Just try not to get too deep into the emotional stuff in advance, because you want that to be what you capture. And yeah, you can definitely use pre-interviewing to form a loose structure of what the interview is going to be. When you come across something interesting, make a note of it, and then you can create your questions from that. It also helps you discover new questions that you could ask, and it helps you get to know the person, which is such an important part of doing an interview. Just think, in ordinary terms, if somebody is really clammed up and nervous about something, they're going to be they're going to give you less detail. They're going to be less, giving with the information that they're giving to you. So you have to really consider that and try to make people comfortable. Try to create a little connection or friendship with them before you interview them. And this is 3-point lighting. So it's a very simple concept, actually, and it looks intimidating, but it's not. So we have right here on the right-hand side, the camera. The key light is the brightest light. It's the main light. But as I'll show you in a second, it shouldn't be your only light. If you're going to do a setup like this, you should have 3 lights. They can be lights from around your house. You can do this with lamps and still have really good results. The fill light is going to be less bright. It's meant to counter the key light and lift up the other side that's going to be dark, because the key light is pointing at the other side and making it so bright that by contrast, the other side is going to become dark. The backlight is to create separation between the subject and the background. And I'll show you guys little better examples here. So on this image, we can see where each light source is coming from. So you really want to imagine it as a line that's kind of going forward in certain directions, like playing pool. It's kind of like it has its own direction, right? And lighting in general is all about giving light direction and purpose. So this one on the left-hand side, we can see is the key light. It's bright. It like really wraps around his face. And then because this side is so bright, it's creating a shadow on the other side. But believe it or not, there has to be a fill light there. If there wasn't one, this would be way darker. So fill lights are very subtle, as you can see. And then the background, I actually think this might be just a separation of focus. I'm not sure there's a backlight there, but certainly never have anybody up against a wall. By the way, always be very far from the wall. The way I have my shot set up here for Zoom is incorrect. I am too close to my wall. You can see my shadow right here. That's not good. You want your subject to be, you want to pull those couches out, pull everything out away from the wall. It's not a good thing to have. It's creates a flat image. So this background, I'm not sure if it's separated or not with lights, but separated nonetheless, which is good. These are just kind of singled out. So this is what it would look like with only a key light. You can see that there's no modeling on the other side of his face. And modeling is just a term that we use to talk about how the light wraps around objects or people. So you can see in my lighting that I have here, this side is brighter and I have a little bit of shade here. That's my fill light. And I don't have a backlight. That's why it looks not good behind me. So yeah, this is what it would look like with only the key. Here we can see what it would look like without and with a fill light. So this is how I chose to highlight that it's really important to have that second light there. You can maybe get away with that background separation through focus, but the fill light is really not an option. So you need at least two lights to make this work. And it just looks so much better with the fill light on there, right? And then this is the backlight. So you can see that sheen on the top of his head. That's how you can imagine the backlight. It literally is wrapping around from behind you, from behind your shoulders, from behind your head. And that's what creates the separation with the background. So all three are very important. And then this is just to point out that 3-point lighting versus a ring light. So these ring lights, everybody loves them. They make you look like a rock star, but it's very just flat lighting. There's nothing very interesting about this lighting. It just kind of looks like she's looking really pretty. So I do consider them more of a beauty kind of thing. This one on the left is much more natural. That's how we're used to seeing people. And I feel like that kind of invites people to get to know the interview subject if it's done in a way that looks more natural. So yeah, batteries, sound checks, camera checks, these are all things that you need to do in advance. Make sure that you've already done camera tests and used your equipment, record some audio of the interview subject or of yourself, and then play it back to yourself and listen to it with headphones. Don't forget your headphones because the sound is going to sound so different if you just played it out loud on the speaker of your phone compared with headphones. Headphones have much better speakers to let you know what the detailed quality of the sound is. And then you want to triple check all of your settings, the frame rate, the resolution, the aspect ratio. The last thing you want to do is get in deep on something and have like a really bad mistake. Like what if it's shooting in 4:3, and it looks like an old TV. You don't want to make it through your whole project and be doing that and then only realize at the end. So these are really things you have to look at in advance and check to make sure everything is set up the right way every time you shoot. Determine your point of focus in your frame. So this is important because it keeps you from being aimless. So you should know what you're focusing on. You should know what your framing is going to be in advance, because while you're setting up the shot, while you're moving those chairs and setting up the tripod and everything, you should be thinking to yourself, yeah, this is because I want to accomplish X, Y, Z. Don't just kind of set it up and then try to make the best of it. Try to think about why you're setting it up the way you're setting it up. And on faces, always make sure that the eyes or the closest eye, if I were turned this way, obviously you'd want to focus on this eye. If I'm this way and I'm right facing the camera, then you can probably get both of my eyes in focus pretty easily. If the focus is soft, which means not in focus, it's not sharp, it's soft, then people are going to be very turned off by that. It's kind of something we don't even consciously think about, but when we see soft focus, as humans, we're just like, what am I supposed to be concentrating on? So you really have to show people where to look, and you do that with the focus. So when you're interviewing somebody, you can shoot objects around their home. So I'm making a documentary partly about myself right now. I shot a bunch of like, the candles that I have, little like healing crystals I have, some of the miniatures I've made, things about me that they don't even have to do with the movie I'm making. But by showing that to the audience, they're going to kind of get a sense of who I am. And that's going to make them like me without them even realizing that that's what I'm doing. So, I mean, all film is kind of manipulation. This is a manipulation for the greater good, so I don't think it's that bad. But yeah, you definitely want to include set things that are personal to that person or personal to the place. So, if you're shooting a beautiful waterfall and somebody left a beer can there, shoot that beer can because that comments on the waterfall. You have to create that kind of story and that intimacy for people because it's not going to come naturally. It's something we have to create. So if you're shooting the setting, the landscape around them, those are both good. The people in that area it's always a good thing. The other people in their family is always a good thing. And once again, as I said before, don't shoot anything close to a wall. It really just makes the image flat and will make it look really unprofessional. When you go to shoot somewhere, it's really important to know where you're shooting. A lot of people starting out will just say, oh, we're going to do it at their house. And they think, that's great. There's not going to be any issues. But the reality is that you should be unplugging fridges, shutting off fans. Like you want to be able to control the location of your interview or of your shoot as much as possible. So actually having it at somebody else's house that you're not going to go to in advance is not a thing you want to do. If you do it, then make sure that they're okay with you kind of messing with their house a little bit and unplugging things and stuff like that, because you really can't have that like sound of a fridge or like the sound of a fan in there. It's going to make it really challenging to edit the audio in post-production. So for that reason, I wouldn't recommend it. And is there predictable or unpredictable noise? Is it next to a highway? Is the wind really loud outside? Maybe it's not the right day to do an interview outside for that reason. You always want to be able to control as much as you can. When you're posing questions, you want to start with the factual nature of things. So, can you tell us your name and what you do, right? Everybody kind of knows how this goes, but the reason that you want to do that, start with the bare factual kind of information in terms of your interview, is because you don't want the emotional parts too much to overlap with the informational parts. If that makes sense. So you definitely want the person to be able to lay it out, speak calmly and frankly about something. And then if there is something emotional, there isn't always. Sometimes it's just an expert, right? But if there is some other emotional element, you want to save that until afterwards, because you definitely don't want something that you have to put early in your film to already be in this emotional space. So you should think about that in advance when you're building your list of questions. You should always be honest with your interview subject. Always let them know what you're doing with the footage, what this is for. Like, you don't want to trick somebody into doing an interview or anything like that, of course. And don't ask them about things that they've told you they don't want to talk about. These are just basic ethical things that I would hope, everybody in regular life does. But the reason I'm bringing them up is because people can be exploited quite often, especially if they're in a vulnerable situation. So keeping ethics in your mind is a really good thing to do when you're shooting this type of thing, because it's important to think about how it's going to impact the other person, right? You don't just want to get something because it's sensational, for instance. You should never pay your interview subjects because that will affect what they're going to say to you. It might bias the opinion they're going to give to you about something if they know that you want to hear a certain thing, for instance. So yeah, I wouldn't do that either. Yeah, so turning off fridges, fans, unplugging, all that stuff, I already mentioned. Overlapping your speech with an interview subject is something people really struggle with. And it's really hard to avoid because you want to be in natural conversation with that person. But on the other hand, it's going to make it a nightmare to edit. So if I'm speaking and somebody else in the Zoom call speaks right now, and then we're just kind of talking at the same time, or the beginning of what I'm saying overlaps with the end of what they're saying, it's fine in real life. But when you go to edit that in post-production, how are you going to separate? It forces you to show both sides of that interaction, even if you don't want to. So you have to kind of leave a couple seconds, leave a little pause. And it's good to let the interview subject know that you're doing that and that they should do that too. Leave a pause in between talking. Let's try to not talk at the same time. It's just kind of a basic thing. Don't underestimate the quality of your sound. I'll mention this again later because it's important. Sound quality is more important than video quality, believe it or not. People will forgive bad videos. They will not forgive bad sound. And it's, once again, not one of those things that people are super conscious of, but I'll notice even when I'm watching my family, like flip through phone, like videos on their phones or whatever, at family reunions, they will go past stuff with bad sound. They won't even understand that they've done that. Or that's why they've done that. So it just turns people off from your work, and you're putting so much effort into this work. So making sure that you have good sound is an easy way to keep people engaged and to show that this is a professional quality thing. Even if you're starting out, don't think that you can't accomplish professional quality. It's achievable. You have a lot of tricks that you can do. So interviewing has some audio considerations that are special, kind of. This is an audio level chart. This is what you'll probably see on your phone if you're monitoring audio while you're shooting. And the red is way too loud. That's going to be overblown. You might not even hear complete words that the people are saying because it's way too loud. You want it in the yellow zone. This bottom of the yellow zone is a toss up. You might end up with good quality sound. You might not. The green level is you're too low. This is going to be way too quiet. You're going to have a hard time boosting this in post-production. So I wouldn't recommend continuing to shoot if you notice that it's that low. Stop and reset it. And this is once again why you want to test these things in advance, even on location. So here we have landscapes and nature. This is just kind of to show, once again, the background, middle ground, foreground elements. And I've just separated these out. I ended up talking a lot more about it earlier. But these are kind of just the examples I put together to reiterate that when you're creating depth with images, you definitely want your background, foreground, midground. And this is an example of how you can accomplish that with focus, and also kind of an alternate example of creating depth in your image without putting things where they belong, so to speak. So this foreground element is in the top left third, and that's okay. It looks nice. It's not an amazing composition, but it's good enough. It's passable. And there's lots of different creative ways that you can do this. It's also a great separation of background through focus. So that's a really good handy thing. This is just kind of another alternative that you could take a look at. So, I mean, this is foreground, midground, background, but it's not the typical foreground, midground background that we would see. It's kind of off to the side and slanted, but it's still all there if you really look at the composition of the photo. And that's kind of what we're aiming for. If you're doing anything alternative, that's totally fine. Just kind of make sure that it is in line with the rule of thirds and everything else. And landscapes and nature close-ups, these are super important for anything, not just nature, but especially with nature. So this is what kind of invites us into that warm feeling of environmental stuff. This is what makes us adore nature, are these close-ups, right? And these are just natural kind of close-ups. This would you would accomplish with a telephoto lens. This one you would accomplish with a macro lens. These are often called close-ups, but it is an extreme close-up. You can see the little hairs on this pod and everything else. This is a lot of enhanced detail, and this will go really far in terms of production value. People really like these macro shots. They're very attractive. This one on the right-hand side with the leaf and the water droplets, that's just an example of how easy it could be to capture. This is like beginner level stuff. This one on the left-hand side, that's going to be very difficult to capture. This person probably sat and waited for this fly to land in the specific spot and get the focus just right in time. And that's more advanced, although this is what we would all love to capture, I'm sure. Time lapses are super useful for your videos in general. You can use them as intros for your YouTube channel. You can use them in documentary style stuff. It's really versatile. And time lapses are pretty easy to capture as well. On your phone, it'll have lots of different options for time lapse. They can be communicated in different ways, which I'll cover in a sec. I love these cloud time lapses. I do them a lot myself. It's just so beautiful, so easy to do. This one's probably a little harder because it's over probably several hours. But this is the type of thing you can accomplish with time lapses. The mechanism that makes the time lapse possible is called an intervalometer. Some apps will call it that, some don't. Some just say time lapse like this one. So it can be in frames per second, or it can be in this like kind of multiplier method. So that's kind of just something they've come up with, this multiplier method to represent the frames per second. I assume to make it less complicated for people. But yeah, we all have these time-lapse settings on our phones, so they're available. The only thing I would watch out for is if the lighting changes a lot, you might want to do your manual exposure settings, as I was talking about earlier. But yeah, these are wonderful and super easy to use. So definitely a great production value for what you're paying. It's something you already own, right? And you can just put that on a tripod to accomplish it. Panning and zooming are two super easy things that just happen to go with documentary, capturing nature, that type of thing. They're just movements that come up over and over again, and they go really well together. So panning and zooming, I would say, are the two best movements to use to capture nature. These birds, for instance, it looks like it's somebody with just a camera on a tripod, but this is actually a panning shot. They're moving the camera with the birds. So this is why it's a little bit better with nature. Also with the horizons and landscapes, it's really nice to capture with a panning shot. So just something to consider. When you're capturing animals, it can be really frustrating. A friend of mine was doing a bee documentary this year, and she found it really difficult chasing around these bees and trying to pull focus and everything else. So she ended up shooting it with her cell phone. Because it's a lot easier to get focus quickly, and it's a lot easier to be kind of nimble in those situations. But still, even with that, you definitely want to be patient. One of the telephoto lenses that we mentioned before would be really useful. You can use the zoom function, that pinching that we talked about on the screen, but don't overuse it because as we discussed, it'll be a little more pixely and not as nice. But you can get away with like 10, 15 times zoom on your phone, and it'll look okay. It'll be passable. Just don't overuse it. And of course, be nice to animals and don't intrude on their space. You always want to do it from a distance. These are the three shots that you want to walk away with from almost every situation without exception. A wide shot, a medium shot, and a close-up shot. And these are of people, but once again, as in my tree example from earlier, it could be a field, a large field with a tree in the center, and then we get closer and we just see the top to the bottom of the tree, and then we get closer and we see a branch and some leaves. So wide, medium, and close-up. Those are the three. If you didn't learn anything else from the thing I was talking about with shots, This is the takeaway. These are the big ones that you have to capture every time. And it'll give you something to cut to in post. You don't just want the one shot, you want different versions of that shot, because that's what really draws people in and makes it interesting to us as human beings. So you don't always have to be literal. We can be creative with this stuff. Even if it's just like a regular kind of tutorial video or something, you could still be really creative with what you're showing. So I have a few examples here of how you can accomplish it. These are visual metaphors. So it's, you know, if you are trying to convey that it's a defeated part of the story, like things aren't going too well, could be something sad, right? Like a crumpled bag, a parking ticket, like defeat, or a rainy day even. Just slight things like that are really helpful in conveying the mood of your story to the audience. And a new start, it could be a bird flying away. So like we're watching this bird sit there on a lamppost or something, and then which is a really easy shot to get, by the way, and then they take flight. And that can be like a new passage of life, a turn in the story, something unexpected is happening, a new start, a fresh start. You can interpret these things so many different ways. And all these visual metaphors, people don't even really consciously think of them most of the time. It's just kind of something we intuitively know what that means. So thinking about these is super helpful. And then I just have for like fragile kind of feeling, small animals or insects, because they're so delicate. Broken tree branch or a child. This is just automatically going to make us think of vulnerability, fragility, so if you're trying to convey something, try to come up with a visual metaphor. And while you're going around shooting, try to think of how you could use those metaphors. Having said that, you can just capture whatever inspires you, and you can probably turn it into a visual metaphor later without any kind of like pre-planning or anything like that. Bad sound is the worst. It really is. I know I already said this, but it really bears repeating. So I was given this example in film school, and I really enjoyed it. If you close your eyes while you're watching a video or a movie, you still know what's going on through the sound. But if you watch a video without the sound, you probably won't be able to follow it. And that's just to emphasize that sound is so much more important to the storytelling process sometimes than the actual images can be. As well, audiences will forgive bad video sometimes, but they won't forgive bad sound. So you really want to concentrate on your sound quality and using microphones, external microphones, at least one of those small ones that plugs directly into your phone. That's how you're going to get there. So just pay attention to it. It's not something you can just kind of wipe over. As a filmmaker, I'll say a lot of times we would love that if you could just wipe over it. Sometimes it's not the most interesting thing to concentrate on, but it is really important. And it is the simplest thing you can do to give your videos a professional feeling. 100% true. So where are you going to put all your footage after you shoot it? Hard drives. Another not exciting topic that should be of interest to anybody who's making videos. So quite often I mentor people at work a lot with the Filmmaking Cooperative that I work at. And quite often when they're beginning in filmmaking, they haven't even thought about this at all. So if you've already thought about this, you have a head start. Congratulations. It's something that people usually do is to put all of their footage just on their computer, on their desktop or laptop, and then they'll edit on their computer. But after you've made a couple videos, that's going to get really like out of control really quickly. It might even get out of control on the first time, depending how much you're shooting and what the size of your video. So you definitely want to purchase hard drives. It's one of like the only things that I would say you have to or you should purchase. I'm not big on just spending money for no reason, but I think these are well worth the investment. It also helps keep your stuff organized and it keeps your stuff safe. So like if your computer crashed, all of your footage and your project files would be on this external hard drive. I'm sure the editing workshop will cover that in the future. But yeah, it's something to keep in mind while you're shooting. You already want to have the hard drive and be offloading onto a hard drive. It just is something you should always do. It's a real bummer to lose your whole project. I've had that happen. I have projects that I don't have anymore. I don't have any footage of them. I don't have any copies of them. I had to go back and ask one of my actors for a copy of one scene that I had given him. and that's the only thing I have of my movie. And it's really sad. So definitely backing stuff up is going to avoid that kind of tragedy. And I highly suggest it. 2 copies is the best case scenario. So if you have one on your computer and one on a hard drive, that's pretty good. If you have one on a computer and 2 different hard drives that you're copying, and you have identical information on both of them, or in all 3 places or 2 places, that's going to be even better. I keep hard drives with my parents of past projects that are like the copy hard drive, because I know if my house, God forbid, catches on fire or something, there are spare copies somewhere else. So that's a little more serious thinking in terms of filmmaking, but for your own purposes, just make sure that there's at least one other copy that exists, and you'll be grateful for it later at some point. The hard drive size that you purchase will depend on the resolution that you're shooting on. So it's no mystery that the bigger the file size, the bigger the hard drive you need. But that's something you want to keep in mind. If you think you'll be doing that 4K thing a lot, then get like a 3, 4, or 5 terabyte hard drive. If you're just going to shoot in standard or 1080p, then you can get away with like a 2 terabyte hard drive, or maybe even a 1 terabyte hard drive. So yeah, that's a little more boring stuff, but necessary. And the beginner's mistake, not getting enough B-roll. So even if you're aware that you could come up short on B-roll, it seems that people still do it, just like from overestimating how useful a clip is. So if you capture, say, 10 things, you might be like, oh, I've got it, that's enough. It's kind of never enough. You always wish you had more options. Of course, try not to overshoot, but for the most part, people do come up short on B-roll the first couple times they shoot things. And you'll need things to play over people talking, or your own narration. If you're narrating a film and it's just your voice, what's going to go over that? Like, what are the images that you're going to show as you're conveying whatever you're conveying to the audience? That's going to be your B-roll. So it's important to capture that and get lots of different angles, lots of different types of shots. Variety is kind of the key with B-roll. Don't stay on a talking head the whole time. So once again, this is a talking head. We see these in documentaries all the time. If you stay on that the whole time, people really do lose interest. It's good to show the person. It's good to show their face, but only for so long before it becomes kind of more boring. I would say the limit is probably about 10 seconds, maybe 10, 15 seconds of showing somebody talk, and then you should be on to something else. Even if they're continuing to talk, you can still have their voice talking over other shots from your B-roll. And that's a technique that'll also make your projects look really professional. So yes, in keeping the audience's attention, there are certain things you want to consider. First, I mean, like, you can find these kind of all over YouTube, different pieces of advice and everything. These are kind of from a filmmaking perspective, not like a I'm trying to sell you something perspective. So you'll get different advice if you look in different places. You want to tell them what they can expect to learn. So it's an audience expectation issue with that one, where you want to always be conveying to them, this is what this video is about. This is what I'm going to tell you in this video, without telling them the whole story, right? Make the audience care about you by speaking to them and asking them questions. That's it's more like rhetorical questions, right? Like, how would you feel if this was in your backyard? Like, you want to be kind of involving them in the discussion. And we see this technique a lot used in YouTube videos where people say, comment below. Comment below is this exact same thing. You're involving the audience. It's an interaction and engagement kind of approach, and rhetorical questions will get you there. So it's important to kind of know that. Give them something to look forward to. So giving people something to look forward to it can be as simple as saying a vague statement about, you won't believe the reason why, right? And then they find out the reason why at the end of the video. It's just something to keep them engaged along the way. When psychologically, when we know that something is ahead, that's going to be a reward, so to speak, then we'll stay and we'll watch the video, and it can even be boring in the middle, but we want to know that thing. What was the thing that they said at the beginning? What were they talking about? So creating that little bit of buzz for yourself or interest of what is this mysterious thing we're going to cover later, is something that you can employ to make your videos more engaging. If you think it's interesting, it probably is. There are some exceptions to that, specific interests where, our family or friends might tell us like, you talk about that all the time, maybe not those ones, because there are things that we specifically find interesting that other people don't. But if you're looking at a situation and you're like, wow, that's interesting, it's probably interesting to most people. We're all not that different from each other, right? So you can use your own judgment as the judgment that you would assume the audience has. And if you find it boring at one part, if you're editing your film and you find one part lagging or boring, it probably is. You should probably change it. Or if you find the interview that you're doing boring, it probably is. You should address those concerns, basically. So it's kind of like use your own judgment, but also try to be objective, and imagine putting yourself in the audience's point of view. Would they find it interesting? You also want to mine your subject matter for interesting factoids. So one example of this I can come up with is I recently did a workshop for our Red Gemini 5K camera at AFCOOP. And when I did that, I looked up all these fascinating facts about the camera, about how they built it. NASA was like a client of Red, the camera maker, and they made this sensor specially for NASA so that they could see in space. Stuff like that. In your story, like having to do with like, if it's environmental issues or architecture or whatever, just cool little, almost like fun facts that we encounter so much, but maybe don't call them fun facts. It sounds a little lame. But yeah, just factoids that you can work in that are that'll pique people's interest. We all love to feel like we're learning stuff, and it doesn't have to be difficult to learn things. It can be something quick and snappy and kind of like a pop version of an actual fact, right? Follow through with your editing and sound editing. So keeping the audience's attention is something that you have to think about in every process of the filmmaking, or in every part of the filmmaking process. And the post-production part is kind of like what people often sweep under the rug, discount, underestimate how important it is. Editing is going to be what makes or breaks your project. So I could have the most beautiful footage, the best quality sound, everything is amazing, but then I go bring everything into my editing program and I just kind of line it up in a very logical and calm manner and just lay it straightforward, and I don't put much more effort into it. That's not going to keep the audience's attention. You have to work for it. So you'd have to cut away to things. You'd have to make it interesting for them. Maybe you want to put some music in there and pace your shots to the music. That also helps keep people engaged. And you don't even have to keep that music there, by the way. People will just use that as like an editing technique. But yeah, following through with your editing and sound editing is super important. The audience isn't going to care about your topic unless they care about you or your interview subjects. That's mostly true. There are a few exceptions to that where like the situation is so terrible or gripping that we're going to be interested regardless. But if it's a topic that people aren't automatically interested in, you have to ingratiate them into being interested in it. You have to convince them that it's interesting. And the most interesting thing to people is people. We are more interested in other humans, in ourselves and the people around us, than anything else. So exploiting that and using that as a tool to gain their interest and to create a narrative is like kind of a double, like it's a two-pronged approach, basically. So you can show personal objects and settings, as we discussed. Share personal facts about yourself, your own personal point of view, why this is important to you, why you want to make this thing, why you're making this thing. Like those are important questions that the audience would be interested to know, probably, So you can use that kind of material that's just sitting there to make it more of a narrative that they see you as like a character, or they see the interview subject as a character. That's how we do it in fictional cinema, and it's the same with documentary. You really need to kind of create this person that they're going to be interested in, even if the person or character is the land. You know, that's still a character that you have to kind of get people to like, right, in order for them to care about it. Speaking candidly and showing them that you're a good person. You're not trying to pull anything over them. You're not trying to be slick. Don't put on like a television host voice or anything like that. Be yourself, and invite other people to do the same. If it's the interview subject, right? We want people to be natural and likable. When people are trying to be slick or too, put on, it really puts people off of what you've made, and you definitely don't want to do that. Even if you're not showing any people, you can use narration to make it personal. So say, for instance, that there's no interviews, it's just you and you're showing shots of the land and you're narrating it, or whatever the case. You can still talk about what's personal to you in your narration. You don't just have to recount the facts of a situation. You can say, like, I discovered this when a friend of mine mentioned blah, blah, blah. Like those little things make everything more personal to us, and it'll make the audience feel connected to you. And that's how you can kind of like turn it into a story, even though it's not a story. Or it might be a story. You never know. So people care about people and animals, which we personify. So still people. That's basically true. And it is easier to get people to be interested in humans or animals than it is to get them interested in land or other things like that. We tend to always take the point of view of, yes, but how does this land issue affect the people? It always comes back to people. So just make sure that if you don't have any human characters in your film that you're making, that you imply or convey to the audience what the human cost is, the human toll, or the impact, right? That's gonna make them interested, because once again, we care about ourselves and we care about other people. That's kind of what interests us as humans. So once you have their attention, and then you actually want to tell them a story, try to make it a beginning, middle, and end. That would be ideal. And you can build this up with all kinds of methods, like how did it happen? How did it happen in the past? What's happening now? What's going to happen? It could be that type of setup, for instance. Demonstrating the impact of your subject matter, making the viewer feel like they're right in there with you. And that comes back to close-ups and extreme close-ups. The more close we are to something, the more intimate we feel with it. So that's just kind of how our brains work. And you can exploit that fact by to garner more attention and garner more engagement from the audience by showing them things that are going to make them feel like they're right there with you. This is happening to them, and they're in that place that you're in, right? Once again, I just said that I'm using extreme close-ups and close-ups there and pushing in to emphasize the emotion. Those really are the most emotional shots you could do, is kind of moving in on something, right? We're concentrating on it, and we're feeling like there's some kind of tension or some kind of build up to something. And then close-ups and extreme close-ups just make you feel that intimacy, as I mentioned. Write out your narration to help with your story structure. So this could be even in like an essay format or anything that you're comfortable with. But if you are doing narration, you can write out the narration and keep it as a story structure. Like keep that in your mind that you're trying to create a story. You're not just talking. You're trying to tell a story, just like you would tell a story to your family or friends about your day. You want to structure it in the same kind of way, right? And remember your English classes, because that is exactly the type of story that we want to create. We want to have all of those elements in there, leading up, laying out the situation, and then like things intensify, things hit a climax. We kind of the action kind of recedes or subsides, and then we have the resolution. So I mean, that's kind of every story I've ever heard, of course, but you have to make that your own and kind of apply it to situations that don't typically have this structure. And through creating the narrative in post, you can do this really easily. As I mentioned before, sometimes you capture something and you don't even realize that it would make a really great point to use this certain piece of footage with a certain language. So you can certainly create your story in post, and narration is one way that you can do that. And that is it, you guys. That is the whole thing. Do we have any questions?
Thanks, Abner. That was amazing.
Oh, great. I'm glad to hear it.
I'm really glad that was recorded because I'm going to want to go back and take like way more detailed notes. I feel like that was like a whole semester's worth of crash course in like 2.5 hours. That was impressive.
Great.
I
Yeah,
totally agree with you. And I'm meeting friends for lunch later, and I'm sitting here thinking, all I want to do is now go work on my film.
I was thinking that you might be feeling that, Kristen. I can just, when you had that comment earlier, I was just imagining all the gears in your brain just like spinning.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm someone who's found, like I was, finds filmmaking incredibly intimidating. And so it's something that I just kind of assumed I could never do. And it's just nice to have like someone who really knows what they're doing come in and just like give a bunch of like, I feel like any good, like you don't necessarily need to know every trick in the book to know how to make something good. And this is like, anything in here will allow you to make something of quality. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Oh, no worries.
And I got out my backup as you were talking. I'm like, oh my God, I haven't backed up the latest version of the film. So as soon as we go off, I'm going to back it up.
Yes, it's so tragic. And it's such a simple thing to do. I mean, hard drives do cost money, though. They're like $100 or so each, but such a worthwhile investment.
Worth it. I actually had a nightmare last night of the house burning down and me losing every piece of work I've ever done. Like, no lie. So when you brought that up, I was like, someone else feels me. Knows the pain.
And I can tell you at Costco, they're pretty cheap actually. So that's a really good place to buy them. Not to support big box stores, but just, yeah. I have a couple questions if no one asks, but I don't want to jump in front of everyone else. So.
Go for it, Kristen.
Go for it, Kristen.
Okay. Well, a couple of them you kind of answered, but I wanted to ask you sort of with adding voiceover. You might have noticed I like momentarily raised my hand and then lowered it because you were already on to something else.
Oh, sorry.
No, it was totally fine. When you're adding voiceovers, can you maybe talk a little bit about that and how? Because I sometimes find I struggle with that and what to say, what to like, how is it distracting? Can people like listen and to like fact-based stuff and watch video, or should you like really leave images on for longer time when you add voiceover and that sort of thing? Right.
Yeah, those are good questions. So, I mean, when you're adding narration in or voiceover, it's both the same thing, whatever you want to call it. It's really important to both have an idea what you're going to say in advance. So that'll help you create the storyline kind of your project. But having said that, whatever you capture is going to be not what you expected to capture. So I often find myself writing it in advance and then writing it again after I've captured everything. And that way it's a little easier to put together because you've started out with the structure that you want. So you loosely know what you're going to do. And then at the end, you kind of tighten that up and make it more appropriate. I do think people can concentrate on those things at once. I think the more senses you engage, the better, unless it's too much, you know, like it's just a flashing bright light. That's probably too far. But I think people can take it. And in fact, I have, like my father, one time we went to go see a movie together in theaters, and he didn't even realize that it was narrated. It just is such a natural thing that you don't even sometimes really recognize, like, oh, this movie has narration. Like you don't really think that to yourself when you encounter it in films. So just think of it in that perspective of like, it's all around us. It's always there. We see it in the news. We see it everywhere. So we're very much used to it. And I don't think it's off-putting to do that. I do think that when you have narration, you can settle on shots for longer. You're right about that, because it's a little more reflective. And also another thing about narration, you want to be soft spoken, intimate. You'll notice like the best narrators, I'm probably bad at doing it, but you can see what I mean by it, are the ones who are really leaning in. They have a quiet place. They're just talking really frankly to a microphone, you know, and that's that kind of like intimacy and feel that you want to have with your audience. It's like you're reaching out to them, and it's almost like a subliminal thing, right? So you want it to be really easy and calm to listen to. And the other thing about narration, I would say, is don't record it until your completed project is done, until you have all of your video in a row and it's all almost finished. That's when you want to go back, kind of type out your narration, print it out, whatever stage you're at with it, and then read it over the video as it plays and see how it feels to you. Then you can record it. And then from that recording, you can play with where you want to put which piece of the narration, or you can just put it as one, big timeline, or like one item on the timeline. There's a lot of different approaches, but always wait until you're almost done, because you don't want to do 2 sessions of narration or voiceover. You just want to do the one.
And do you recommend like recording it from a technical question on that, recording it separately and then adding that into the editing software you're using, or using, like I use Rush, and it has the option to just allow you to speak into the computer, is that, and use the microphone that's in the computer, on the computer and whatever.
Right.
Do you have suggestions one way or the other?
Yes. So I'm aware that you can do it on the timeline, and I think you can even do it with like iMovie and different stuff like that. The only problem with that is that it's really hard to get it right the first time. So it's just like anything else. If you go to shoot a movie, you're going to have to do multiple takes of things. This is something that you can't just keep, like, just like a documentary interview, that's going to be a one-shot deal. You'll only have one shot to make that happen. But if you're doing narration, you're going to want to say it a different way. You're going to want to have like, oh, this is more sensitive. This is harsher. This is a firmer tone. I didn't say that fast enough. It doesn't fit in right. And that's kind of why those timeline approaches are built, because their mode of thinking is, well, if people can just talk over the video, then they can get it perfect the first time. But there is no perfect the first time. So I guess my answer is that you could do it either way. Both ways, you're going to have a sound file, but you're going to probably end up chopping it up either way you record it.
I was laughing because that's something I've learned. It's like, oh my God, you think it's this simple thing to add a narration or voiceover, and you can spend so much time doing it.
Yes, totally. There's no way around it.
And is there any way to sort of minimize, is there a piece of equipment you can recommend? The people I work with do a lot of work on the ground in a noisy area that isn't controllable. And we sometimes, often end up with like a lot of background noise that it's hard to get over. At the moment, they're mostly just recording with their iPhone.
Okay, so a lavalier mic is really good for that purpose if it's somebody talking that you want to capture, because it's so close. It's right in front of the throat, right? So that's going to be your best bet, is to just have the sound source, the capturing source, closer to the person. It's the simplest solution. Another solution that might not be as simple is getting a microphone that has a low cut filter and a high cut filter. These are like things that would kind of try to tune out, say, a car engine, or, fridges, fans, like the things I mentioned earlier. Those high and low frequency kind of noises will get cut out a little bit. That would be really helpful, but I don't think it'll be as good as a lav mic. I would only do that if you couldn't put on a lav mic for whatever reason.
Okay. And do you have anything, this is probably a whole nother workshop, but we are using a drone as well to incorporate into our filming. And so I was really interested in the points you made about, because a lot of what we're filming is sort of activism, and so power and sort of it's in my mind, like the steam was coming out of my ears thinking about how we could like look at power dynamics and hierarchies using film footage with the drone. And
Right.
so, but in sort of in general, and like transitions from drone to on the ground and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean that's like an ideal scenario to use that type of shot. I think that there's a couple ways you can use a drone for that situation. One would be just capturing how many people care about this topic, like how many people care about this issue. Look at the breadth of this movement, that's one way to use it. I don't think that's going to make them feel too small on screen or anything. But you might want to get it from like a side angle as opposed to like being on top of them. You want to be kind of like parallel almost. That would be really good as a panning shot or something. And then when you're on the ground, I've seen some shots that are really good for protest type things where you're looking up at the person who's holding a sign. Those are really impactful. That's like the person is taking a stance against something, standing firm kind of. And that could be like anything, a full shot, a medium close up, like whatever you feel is right. But you can use those power dynamics pretty well with that. But yeah, with drones, it's being on top of people that's really going to make them feel small. So that's the one thing I would avoid. Panning with drones is really powerful as well, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And I just one final question is: do you have any suggestions on, like MEC, for example, has their secondhand equipment sale? Is there a place that where you could like buy less expensive equipment and try it, and then if you fall in love with it, then invest the money in, for those of us who don't have sort of unlimited resources to that was just to throw out there to ask if you have any suggestions on that.
Totally. Well, my film cooperative, for one, we rent that type of gear. So you might want to reach out if you have like a local film association of any kind, that anybody who's looking to help beginners make movies, that type of association. Ours is a co-op. Some others have different structures. But we have that equipment for rent. We have phone gimbals and all sorts of things like that. So I would probably recommend some kind of association like mine. The other option would be, of course, to buy it, try it, and return it, which is probably not ideal, but you could do that if price is a factor. And then the third thing, I would say just like research it really, really hard and know what you want specifically before you buy it. That's kind of how I went about it. And I had pretty good luck. There were a few things that didn't turn out how I wanted, but mostly it worked out. So just like what's specifically for my phone, what exists out there, look up, I have a Samsung Galaxy S9. What accessories are there for my Samsung Galaxy S9? And then that's where you'll find like all these cases and everything else that are specifically for that phone. And that'll stop you from or help you avoid buying things that you don't need and that you can't necessarily return.
Thank you. And I'll stop hogging the space now.
I actually have a quick question. You did talk a little bit about this in your talk, but I was wondering if you have any advice or suggestions on establishing non-human characters, like whether that's like a building or a landscape. Like, I know that you were talking about a lot of that in relationship to kind of how that then affects a person, but I'm like curious if like you're wanting to somehow capture or characterize something that isn't a person. How do do you have any advice?
Totally. So it is more challenging for sure, but you can do it by like showing the smaller details, I think is the best main approach. So, I mean, if your character is a forest, then what are the animals in this forest? What are the insects doing? What do the leaves on the trees look like? Like those kind of close-ups and the detail that you capture is going to create that picture of the character in the person's mind. So if it's a building, I would maybe focus on like the cracks in the wall, maybe like, if somebody left gum on the sidewalk, like, like all these little things are like, that's what represents this area, You know what I mean? Like, so that's the kind of, those are the little character aspects that you want to look at. Even like, this is a place where people walk their dogs. That says something to us about the building and about the situation. So just really anything that's in the environment, I would get multiple shots of, and you'll see when you go into post-production, it'll work, it'll go together. You'll kind of be able to be like, oh, this is the building as a person. But you have to get those detailed shots. That's the key, I would say.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you.
I have a quick technical question.
Sure.
Kind of building on what Kristen was talking about, transitioning from drone to like an iPhone, for example. So is I know that you mentioned frame per second is important to keep consistent. And also, what if you shoot in a different aspect ratio? Like, is there a way to change that in post-production, or is it just generally a good idea to keep the aspect ratio the same from the beginning?
Yeah, aspect ratio is definitely something you want to establish and keep consistent. I do know filmmakers who in fictional film will play with aspect ratio and have like intentionally different aspect ratios for different reasons. We all kind of have our justifications, but for this type of filmmaking, I would say keep it consistent 100%. When it comes to aspect ratio, the 16:9 is what you want to go with. If you end up with different aspect ratios, it could be a problem. What you would have to essentially do is stretch one of them out to match the other. And that's not an ideal scenario because you're going to get that like ugly kind of stretched look, the pixelation and the noise and everything. So yeah, I would veer away from that. If it was my personal film and I accidentally shot something that was a square shape and most of my film is a rectangle, I would leave it in there. I would just leave it as that aspect ratio and let it fly, because like documentaries, you'll notice a lot. They have pillar boxing. So pillar boxing is when the sides have black going down them. That's creating a pillar, right? And then letterboxing is when the top and bottom have black bars. So in documentaries, we see all the time this change between pillar boxing and letter boxing and everything in between, because they're taking from, it's a multimedia project, right? They're taking from so many different sources that you can't help but have that happen, especially with archival stuff and stuff like that. So in short, I would say like people are so used to it that you shouldn't be afraid of it, but that's only if you've already done it. I wouldn't do it on purpose unless there was a reason for it.
Yeah, it's amazing how the right aspect ratio changes everything. Like even for my architecture projects, I switched to a 16:9 from like a 4:3, which is how I was usually making slides. And it made my projects actually feel more cinematic.
Yes.
It's a big difference. There's a lot of correlations between what you were talking about and architecture too, just in like a lot of the sort of like tips you gave. I had ideas for, I can try that in my drawing that I'm going to be working on, or like in terms of composition. So even though it's maybe not always obvious, I think there's a lot of connections between architecture and film too.
That's so cool. Artistic overlap. I love it.
Yeah, thank you, Abner. That was wonderful.
No, yeah, thank you guys. I'm so grateful to have been chosen for this, and I love teaching this type of stuff, so it was really a pleasure for me. I like talking. I'm sorry it was so long.
It's okay. It was a lot of information. I don't really see what you could have cut. So
Exactly. And there was no point when I like looked at the clock and I was like, whoa, look, we've been going for 2 hours. And there was no point I was like starting to yawn or,
Oh, great.
So yeah,
Great.
Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you for such a great lecture. There's so much information in there. I'm really excited to get out and use it. Thank you.
Abner, what kind of camera do you use for your films?
So I work at the Atlantic Filmmakers Cooperative, and because of that, I have access to pretty much any camera you could imagine, like red cameras or other cinema cameras. So I have a wide selection. I'm very lucky in that way. But before I worked there, I actually just used like camcorders, like Canon kind of, just 1080p kind of average quality camcorders. And before that, I used my cell phone. So yeah, that's the seed for this course, actually. My kind of trial through making a short film with a cell phone, and all of the things that I ran into that were not good, and all the things I discovered that are pretty cool.
Cool, yeah, I'm excited to learn more about it. It's really, I mean, it's awesome that so many people have a camera with them all the time that they can technically make a film with. You know, it's a matter of like having the skills to translate that to film in a nice way. I think like most of the footage I take on my cell phone isn't very good.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot of techniques you can employ to kind of improve those things, and most of that is built into the course, but this is just kind of a starting point as well. Like, I hope that after this, people kind of look it up and kind of guide themselves through the learning process, because there's tons out there. This is just a jumping off point.
I think we'll just wait a couple more minutes before we get started.
Could you maybe at the end or on a sheet that we could add to the, like the other one that you had said you had put together, of resources that you think are good? Because I've also like looked up, you know, film courses and so on online, and they're just endless. And so as somebody who doesn't know a lot about it to start with, I don't even know what really like which would be good ones to take or try, or is it you just try them and feel like, well, if there's something useful, then great. If not, then so if you could maybe give some recommendations, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, for sure. I think it is, you were right, on the former statement that you made, it is easier or harder rather to know what is good advice and what's bad advice when you're starting out. So definitely I'll kind of pick out some better ones to get you guys started.
Okay, if anyone else has any questions, either I'm looking at the chat. I don't see any. There's one that says business idea question mark. I'm not quite sure what that's referring to. If that's from Heather MacArthur, if you want to expand on that. I don't know if she's.
I believe that was in reference to you talking about like equipment or something, about
Yes.
rental equipment or something. I think that was what that was in reference
Okay,
to.
great. Okay, yeah. Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, I think unless anyone else has any final questions or comments, I'd like to once again just thank you, Abner, so much. I feel like I've learned so much today, and I look forward to. Abner has also said that he will put some information sheets together, and I'll be putting this recording on the Global Studio website, and I will put links to those documents, so you'll be able to access those documents as well on the website. And so just thank you for all of this amazing information, and thank you to Laura and Adria and Larissa and everyone at Supernatural for organizing this, because I know it's a lot of time and it's a hectic time at the start of the school year for everybody. So thank you. And I just wanted to thank you very much for your kind introduction, Laura. I really, really appreciated that. And I see Douglas has his hand up and wants to make a comment. So I'll just pass it over to Douglas before we close it out.
Yes, I'll be very quick. I just wanted to thank everybody as well, and particularly Abner and Laura and you, Kristen, for doing such a wonderful workshop this morning. I do want to mention we've got we are trying to do some new and different things in the Global Studio. And on Tuesday, we're going to be bridging and branching into music, and we're going to have a performance over Zoom with Stanley Zappa, who is Frank Zappa's nephew. We're going down to Oliver in BC to do this, and it's going to be the first in our music series. The next one's going to be on Friday, October the 8th. We're going to have artists from Toronto, and Soweto all performing together. It's going to be pretty interesting stuff. So if you're interested in seeing the overlaps between some of the global studio activities and music, please join us there. It's all posted on our news and announcement. But again, thank you, everybody. It was a great workshop.
All right, thank you. And Laura, or does anyone from Supernatural want to make any final comments, or maybe do you want to just say a word about the next workshop before we go?
Sure. Yeah. The next workshop will be on Wednesday, October 6th with Francesca Equiazzi. So that's going to be all about storytelling and developing a narrative through film. And we've sent out some storyboards for that one. So we're really looking forward to it. I think it builds perfectly on, Abner, what you set up.
Great. And I just want to reiterate, I think it's great, these sort of crossovers between music and film and architecture. And it's a couple of friends of mine from Soweto, so coming to that are going to join. And so I think that'll be doing some really cool Cueto, which is Soweto rooted hip hop music. And so, yeah, I think it's really interesting to just have all these overlaps and really think about them as part of architecture. So, yeah. All right. Thank you again, everyone. And we'll look forward to next Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you, Abner. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.